a lot of people just give up early, man. That's why businesses fail. It's why, books don't get written or whatever it is. Like, people don't follow the thread long enough. If you follow the food thread long enough, I don't know, me, before you know it, you're out in the woods, like harvesting an alligator.
I'm Luke Story. For the past 22 years, I've been relentlessly committed to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of spirituality, health, psychology, and personal development. The Lifestylist Podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. You are so lucky. You know why? Because you're hearing this podcast at a time in history where there's blue blocking eyewear that doesn't suck and make you look like a total nutcase. When I first found out that being exposed to artificial blue light at night trashed my melatonin and then ultimately my sleep, which leads to a trash life, I was super bummed because if I wanted to go out in public, I had to wear these horrific, really lame blue blocking glasses that probably really didn't work because they were kind of yellowish. They weren't like the right spectrum. It really cuts out the blue and green light like raw optics do. But now, alas, we're all super stoked because we can protect our melatonin and our sleep by wearing blue blocking glasses that are really well designed and super cool looking. People barely even give you a second glance because you look somewhat normal, which is awesome. So you can be kind of like a low-key, down-low biohacker, and people just think, at worst, like, oh, that guy's kind of weird. Like, does he think he's cool wearing his sunglasses at night? If they just think that, I don't really care. If they think I'm weird and I also have really bad taste in eyewear, well, that's a double lose, and I'm not willing to pay that price, even for quality sleep. But seriously, I'd love for you to go check out my buddies over at rawoptics.com. That's spelled R-A, rawoptics.com, where you will find some scientifically valid and also very well-designed fashionable glasses. That's rawoptics.com. The code over there, because you know I got you a code, is Lifestylist. That's going to save you 10% off at rawoptics.com. Right about now would be a good time to get yourself prepared to head deep into the wild with our third-time guest, Mr. Daniel Vitalis. My name's Luke Story, and you are about to embark on a journey that we call episode 245 of the Lifestylist Podcast. After learning to hunt, fish, and forage as an adult, Daniel created his new project, WildFed, which includes a TV show and an amazing podcast to inspire others to start a wild food journey of their own. For 10 years before that, Daniel lectured around North America and abroad, offering workshops that helped others lead healthier, more nature-integrated lives. He's a successful entrepreneur and founder of the nutrition company Surthrival. Most recently, he posted the popular podcast Rewild Yourself, on which I had the pleasure to be a 2-time guest. Daniel's a great friend and someone that I've learned so much from, so it was a great joy to get him back on the Lifestylist for round 3. I want to warn you, it's a bit of a trigger warning, folks. If you're someone that lives a plant-based or vegan lifestyle, this might be a difficult episode for you to stomach, no pun intended. But regardless of what your food and lifestyle choices are, I encourage everyone to give this epic 3-hour conversation a chance. Keep your mind open and your heart open, because I think there is some very intriguing and fascinating information presented. Daniel has had quite the journey in his adult life through all different types of fads. He's one of those guys that's kind of been there, done it, including spending 10 years as a vegan himself. So in this episode, we really focus on hunting, gathering, fishing, foraging, etc., becoming undomesticated, especially as it pertains to food, which is what his whole new project is about. So it's just a fascinating conversation, and I'm just so grateful that I was able to salvage it. Now, Daniel lives in Maine, and after this recording, I sent the files to my production team over at Crate Media. Shout out to my boys at Crate. Love them. Anyway, I heard back from them after submitting my files from this episode and found out from our editor, Gaz, that this was unsalvageable, unlistenable, and unusable. And we spent like 2 hours and 50 minutes in this conversation. It was so spontaneous and so epic. I begged the team over there to spend what I think ended up being probably 8 or 9 hours. So Gaz, if you ever hear this, brother, I guess you will, maybe, if you're the one that edits the intros, I'm not sure. Thank you so much, because this conversation meant a lot to me, and I would have been completely gutted, just like the squirrels and iguanas and other things Daniel hunts, had this not been salvageable. So you, my friends, are listening to a barely salvaged conversation where we talk about the following topics as well as many other things. So I want to encourage you to listen through to the end, because we get into some super deep stuff here. So, why he quit veganism after 10 years and began to eat meat. The sad fact that some people receive death threats from people opposed to killing when they go back to animal foods. The fact that there has never been a civilization of vegan humans. Why the vegan diet requires supplementation to work. Why humans seem to value the lives of certain animals over others and all animals over insects, plants, and fungi, aka the kingdom hierarchy. Why it might be abusive to force carnivorous pets and perhaps even omnivorous children to eat a vegan diet. Then we ponder whether cartoons and stuffed animals are responsible for disconnecting us from our hunter-gatherer roots and diet. The massive amount of killing that takes place in plant-based agriculture. Why wild game and plants are far more nutritious than farmed foods. Why animals suffer a more painful death at the hands of wild predators than by hunters. How to deal with the potential risk of eating contaminated wild game. What led Daniel to begin foraging wild plants and fungi? The surprising lack of species varieties in supermarket fruits and vegetables, the devastating environmental impact of factory-farmed animals and plants, and how regenerative farming might just save us. Why some people who oppose hunting give a blanket pass to native indigenous people while casting condemnation on Caucasian rural folk. How hunters and gatherers help thin out invasive species of plants and animals. Why Daniel believes in some cases hunters understand and protect the environment even more than city-dwelling tree huggers. The fact that the U.S. has the most effective wildlife management and conservation program in the world. How ocean fish stock can be protected and the safest fish to eat. Some of the culinary masterpieces Daniel has created from foraged and hunted foods. And finally, what's new at his outstanding company, Surthrival, and what my go-to products are. Brings me great pleasure to bring this fascinating conversation with Daniel Vitalis to you. Before we jump into that, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the podcast. Literally right now, reach down, click subscribe on whatever app you're using to hear my voice. If you do this, every episode, including this Sunday's bonus show, where I'm featured as a guest on Peak Mind with Michael Trainer, as well as next Tuesday's show, Cutting Edge Cures, the Cerebellum Secret for ADD and Deep Learning with Winford Dorr. If you subscribe to the show, you won't miss those coming episodes or any to follow. I've got one more favor for you before we dive in. If you could just take a screenshot of this and share it on Instagram or text or email this episode to a friend who might be interested in wild living. It'd be a great way to support Daniel's work, the work here at the Lifestylist Podcast, you, and hopefully the person you send it to. Thank you so much for joining me today, and it brings me great pleasure to introduce to you my friend, Mr. Daniel Vitalis. Daniel, it's great to see you again, dude.
Good, man. You look really healthy. It's nice to see you.
You know, it's funny. I don't feel healthy today because I'm on a really weird sleep schedule right now. And I was up till 1 a.m. and just when I do that, it does not make me feel well. But I don't know. I'm having...
how about this? You look happy, man. I can just tell that you got like good things happening in your life.
Yes, I'm happy today. I don't feel that healthy, but I want to jump back in time a little bit and just give you props. I'm someone that considers myself loyal, and I'm forever grateful to you for helping me launch my podcast and encouraging me to go ahead and move into the health and wellness space and being my second episode ever on this show. So just want to start out with a bow to you and thank you for your faith in me and your support as a friend and a colleague. And I'm so excited to have you back on and, you know, kind of be one of the first people talking to you as you've come out of this woodshedding couple of years where you've been rebuilding a brand and a company, and you know now we're in the middle of this amazing launch that I'm so excited to be a part of. So I'm stoked to be back with you, dude.
Thank you, man. And I just want to say, like when you started your podcast, you were looking to me like a really good, like I'm big into starting fires, you know. So you looked like a really well put together Tinder bundle, and when you have that, it's just like touch the coal to it and you know the whole fire is going to go, and I could just see like you had everything in place, like everything was happening. And I mean, to be fair too, I suggested that stuff to you. We were speaking, we were sharing a stage, it was like, I could just see where you were going. I saw the audience responding to you. It was like really clear that this was the direction for you. And so it's been pretty awesome to watch you kind of come up in that. And, like I was saying to you the other day, like a lot of the big name podcasters we were always talking about, it's like, I see you right there along with all their shows now. It's just awesome. So congratulations on your success. And thanks now for helping me as I kind of get a new podcast and show off the ground too.
Oh man, I'm stoked, dude. I love what you're up to. So for those of you, or for those listening that are already aware of you and even people that are new to the scene, let's maybe start out the people that are aware of you and are like, where's Daniel been? Because everyone I know was obsessed with the Rewild Yourself podcast. That's one of the few podcasts ever that I think I've listened to every single episode. Even if it, like, sometimes it would be about like a foodie one or something. And I don't really cook. So it wasn't something I was totally into, but the conversations were still so compelling that I would listen. So I'm like a super fan of your show. And then when you stopped that and went into this new project, I and my friends were kind of like, oh, dude, bummer. Like, where'd Daniel go? So for those of us that know who you are and are kind of waiting for this, what have you been up to over the past couple of years?
One of the problems that I've had is that I didn't start off with like the ambition, like I'm going to be a public persona, or I'm going to be a public teacher, or I'm going to start a podcast. I watched you strategically begin your podcast. You put everything in place and then you turn the machine on. I was like in a car is like rolling down the street and I jumped into the driver's seat and I'm trying to figure out the controls because it's already going. So I was just writing online a magazine because I had been speaking on stages, as you know, back in the longevity days. When I was involved with people like David Wolf would have me on stage. And, as you probably remember, I was getting up on stage and giving a message quite antithetical to what they were teaching. And they kept giving me the stage and I kept breaking down all of the stuff they were teaching about raw foods and veganism and being like, well, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Probably shouldn't do that. I was bringing animal food supplements into that scene. Eventually, it was kind of like, hey, man, like you're kind of ruining our thing. So I started writing. I wanted to do an online magazine because I like to write. And I started doing interviews along with that because I wanted it to be multimedia. And, the number of readers I had, 6,000, 7,000 people reading the articles, these long articles I was writing and everything. But all these people, 100,000 people listening to the podcast. And it was like, okay, this is what people want. But I was already 20 episodes in by the time I figured that out. And I'd never stopped and strategically set that podcast up. So I always felt like I was running behind it, trying to catch up to the momentum that it had. And then through the course of that podcast, because if you recall, I was exploring a lot of taboos around wildness. I was looking at food, but I was looking at things like sex and birth and death and drugs and all these taboo areas of human psychology. But the piece that's always been most interesting to me is the food piece. And I felt like, what was happening is as I was doing that podcast, I was getting drawn deeper into the world of foraging, hunting, and fishing. And I was like, oh, I have a real passion here. This is where, for me, all of the lofty intellectualizing meets the road. Like, can I even feed myself before I get so far out that I'm like thinking about all of these concepts that are like really difficult to bring into reality? Can I even like feed myself off my landscape? And that was what became really interesting to me. And the podcast, as I started to take it in that direction, it was like, okay, that's not what everybody was on board for. I was like, I need to step back. I need to just stop for a second, reassess my career, figure out kind of what I want to come out with and relaunch. So for the last 2 years, I have not been on vacation, as you now know. I've been making a TV show and recording podcasts. I created a whole new brand called WildFed. The idea is kind of like you'd say like a cow is grass-fed. This is like, what's a wild-fed human? Another thing you're familiar with, you remember through our mutual friend David, I was who has a production company out there in LA. I was pitching some shows around LA. Remember that?
Yeah, for sure.
I had done that one sizzle reel called Rewild. And, I had a great opportunity to speak to executives from basically every major network. And every time I did that, I would walk away like shaking my head because they would say things like, we make terrible TV and we know it. And your show is too good. Or they would say, this is really cool. We like it. We need to dumb it down. And in the end, I had Nat Geo after the show. I had Discovery after the show. I had Animal Planet after the show. And when I saw what they were going to pay me, when I saw like how they were going to treat me, when I saw how little control I was going to have, not with David, of course, they were amazing, but with the networks, I just walked away from it. And then eventually, as you know too, I got married. And that whole process of walking away from this idea of open relationships and polyamory, all this stuff that I thought was like so cool and wild.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Chaos creates chaos in your life, for me. And I just had to do a big reassessment, So I just rebuilt myself, got kind of reconstructed. And I also was like, man, I really like this idea of making a show. I want to just do it myself. I connected with a great producer out here and we were like, let's just make it. We don't need to bow to any of these corporate, we're not going to have the distribution. We're not going to get the immediate off, the budget out the gate, but let's try to make it ourselves. And so we've been shooting a TV show. I've now shot almost 2 full seasons of it. And I've been stacking up podcasts along the way. I just launched the podcast WildFed last week. So I think yesterday it was our second weekend. And we're getting ready to start showing people the TV show. And you are one of the first, you're like one of 10 people who've seen the number of episodes you've seen. Very few people have seen it.
Oh, dude. And I love this because as you know, I've lived in Hollywood for a long time and I've, used to work in the industry, and there's so many great creative people here and there's so many wonderful things about Hollywood, but it is a company town and it's a business, And so you have all these creative people like yourself and so many others that I've met and worked with over the years that are doing great things and even impactful projects, not just entertaining projects, but projects that are going to help move mankind and our consciousness forward. And when you try to mix those with the multinational corporation media companies, it gets tricky. And, I'm really pleased that you went, cool, thanks and no thanks. I'm going to do this myself. And what I have to say is one of those 10 people who's seen your show. And, I have no vested interest in kissing your ass, obviously, or propping you up or getting people to buy your show or whatever. It's just like, dude, it looks and feels as good as any show on Netflix, Nat Geo, Discovery. It's a real show. This isn't like...
It's not YouTube videos.
It's not
Because
YouTube
one of the things
videos.
is, as I tell people about it, I'm like, I've been really lucky. The Department of Inland Fish and Wildlife, which is sort of like the equivalent of, our fish and game agency out here, has been working alongside me. Really, they've been amazing and connecting me with a lot of people for me to, biologists and legislators and wardens and stuff like that, and on the project. But they haven't really seen it. And as I tell people about it, or just I meet people or have people on for the podcast, I tell them about it and they all think I'm making YouTube videos. And I try to tell them like, no, it's a show. It's got like an intro. It's 30 minutes long. It's got an outro, storylines are interwoven, but it's like people don't really get it or believe it, especially because my team is 3 people, including me. And we've made it, I've got Jesse, who you've known for a while out in Colorado. I've got Grant Giuliano, my producer. We work really close together, become really good friends. And we've done this on our own, man. And with, how it is, with the tools that we have access to in this really interesting window in history. Who knows how it will be in the future? We know what it was like in the past. Suddenly you could do that on your own, and as an entrepreneur, I'm in a place where I have the time and I have the funds to do it. So I've been able to take 2 years of my life and make this show. And I hope I can make many more seasons of it because I got a lot of ideas for episodes. There's so much there to make. So, and just for people listening, here's kind of the arc of the show. And a typical episode looks like this. I go out in the field and I hunt something, and that could be a fishing trip. It could be collecting clams. It doesn't have to be like a hunt, like, after a big mammal or something. A lot of the episodes I do are after little small things most people don't think about, but we hunt something. We can bring a protein back from the landscape. We go out and we forage something. So it could be a plant or multiple plants. It could be something that's not a plant, like a mushroom, a fungus. Or it could be, again, not a plant or a fungus, but like an algae from the protist kingdom, like a seaweed. But we get some kind of not animal and we bring that back. And then typically we bring that to a chef or a cook. Occasionally I'll home cook at my house, but we bring that food back and we create a meal. And then anybody who is with me to hunt or to forage joins us and we have this like shared meal experience. So typically the episode kind of closes out at the end of the meal. That's an episode, but then there's a seasonal arc because I start first thing at the beginning of the year in the snow, making maple syrup off my trees here. And I end the season on the ice fishing. So as the episodes go on through the season, you see sort of it go from spring to summer to fall to winter. So there's like these 2 simultaneous arcs. And I just think, I like the tone of the show. I like the I like there's like a reverent but still exciting and adventurous tone to it, and something I don't think they would have let me do. If I ended up at Discovery or Nat Geo, they don't make that kind of show.
Yeah, and you would have had to like show a bottle of Coca-Cola in the background or something.
Exactly. My joke is always you would have to bring either a celebrity on, so it would have to be like, Britney Spears is coming with us on this trip, or that was like that they always wanted to either do that, or they would want to take like overweight, Midwestern housewives out on the trip to like show the contrast. So that was the two things the networks would always say: celebrity or like overweight people from a typical standard American lifestyle. And I was like, that's not the show I want to make. I just don't want to make that show. So now we're making it how we really want to make it,
Well, there's a couple of things that are very cool about that. And going back to where you first were going with our ability now to have sovereignty. And, that's, I think, tenuous because of censorship and things that are going on now. But I have a feeling now that it's like, you can't put the genie back in the bottle now that people like you and I have figured out how to be our own independent media companies. And I love that what you've done is circumvented YouTube also, in that it's not a YouTube show, so that if you say something they don't like, or they decide that hunting is now right wing or whatever the fuck,
which will happen, which is going to happen probably.
Yeah, but you have control of your own content, and even in the context of having a podcast. I mean, there's certain topics I tiptoe around a little bit now, like vaccines and things, where I'm like, oh, I don't even know if I'm allowed to ask a question about something now, which is terrifying. But I have a feeling that now that we all have great audio and video equipment, and, even if we were completely censored, eventually we would find a way to put our content out through the dark web or some encryption. Like now there's no like shutting us up permanently, because we're going to find a way. And not that you're doing anything controversial, but we're at an exciting time where we're not beholden to corporate interests in the production of our content and getting out and sharing transformative ideas. I mean, when I watch your show, I'm like, wow, Whole Foods really sounds shitty right now. Like, I want to go eat those wild leeks and like the halibut right off the boat and the wild turkey. These are the episodes I watched last night. I was binging it. So that's why I was up till 1 a.m, by the way. It's your fault.
It works.
And I really had to make myself stop. I was like, I want it. Because I think it was like 1 and 5. And I'm like, but I like, as you said, the seasonal arc, I kind of screwed that up because we were in spring and then, winter, whatever it was. It looked warm and then colder, something like that.
By the way, I'll be controlling that a little bit, because on what you're saying, like having sovereign control of the media means I can put it out how I want. And I'm putting it out one episode at a time, because I don't want you to stay up till 1 a.m. And I want people to see the episodes in sequence. I understand how some musicians feel when only one of their song is being downloaded and they're like, that song fits into a greater artistic ensemble, and taking it out of context, something's lost. And I'm a little concerned about that. So it is nice to be, sort of in control of it. But anyway, sort of back to what you're saying. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing so that's part A, is like, screw the man. We're going to make our own content and we'll find an audience. And it might be 1,000 raving fans rather than 100,000 lukewarm fans, right? But there are people that are really deeply invested in the content. And the second part that I'm really excited for you about, and I think what makes the content compelling, is that you're actually just living your real life and documenting it in an aspirational and educational way. And I'm managing to do the same thing. In other words, like, I would be doing the exact same shit I do every day if it wasn't my job. I would be tracking down interesting people that I can learn from and having conversations and trying different modalities in the realms of spirituality, health, biohacking, going on adventures, going to Costa Rica, doing ayahuasca, doing whatever. It's the same shit that I'm doing. I just like live stream everything, have microphones and cameras going. And I know
And the doorway to opportunities opens a bit wider once you start creating the media. So what's cool is it's sort of like, as you know, when you podcast like you're doing, it's kind of like you get this beyond college education in your disciplines of choice. You start to get to bring the professors to you. You get to sit down with them one-on-one and ask all your questions. Like if you pay $150,000 a semester, sit down in a room and barely get your questions in. You know what I mean? You're getting to have it how you want it. And so for me, this is partially to get kind of, what I'm after. What I would like to do would be harder if I didn't have this. Also, I've been an entrepreneur for about 12 years, and that's when I started Surthrival 12 years ago. It's pretty amazing to me. We're like, we've made it 12 years, and I've had a kind of a guiding philosophy, which is like, keep it small, keep it all. Because I see a lot of people build up businesses that get bigger than there are certain people I know who want to have a huge business and be at the head of a big organization and who have those big visions. And I really respect that. I'm just not that guy. Like, I don't want to be the CEO of a big company with I don't want 300 employees. Like, I wouldn't sleep at night. Like, you know what I mean? I want to keep a slick, lean team. I want to be team leader of like an elite special operations squad, not a general of an army. You know what I mean? And full respect to people who have the endurance to do that other thing. But I have learned, and this is what turned me off too, when I saw to do a television show the way it's typically done, I was going to need to be in the field with 6, 7 people. I was going to be traveling with a big crew. We were going to have new photographers, videographers everywhere, every town we went to. They hire PAs in those places. And it's just like all this craziness that I was like, no, I want like my buddy and me to be in the field together, maybe one other person. And I want to just keep it slick. The other thing that's really important to me is that when I make media, I got 3 things in mind. I want it to be very entertaining. I want it to be very educational, and I want it to be very artistic. And I think that you get entertainment on most television today. With the advent of Netflix making their own content and Amazon making their own content, art's starting to come back. Because man, did we ever lose art in American television? But it's starting to come back. Education is pretty slim. And I think that people are smarter than networks give them credit for. And I think people do enjoy learning, especially if it's through an artistic and entertaining medium. But like you said, I would rather have 1,000 people who are fully on board than 10,000 people that are partially on board. And so one thing I like about controlling my own show is that I can develop relationships with those people who are following it and be a sort of a guide for them. And yeah, I don't care how big it gets. I care how successful it is. And when it comes to a successful business, it's the bottom line. It doesn't matter if you could have 1 million customers at $1, right? Or 1 customer at $1 million. Both are equally successful projects, right? For me, like I said before, if I get 1 client at $1 million, I'm sleeping a little better at night than if I'm managing 1 million clients at $1. That's just a stressful business model to me. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit of the vision for how I want to run it behind the scenes. And last thing is, I just want to say, anything I make has always been a Trojan horse for something deeper. This is about wild food on the surface, but as you know, and knowing me, it's like it's about a lot more than that. I really want to awaken people to something that I think has gone dormant in them, and I'm using this show and food as a Trojan horse, as a vehicle to get to that destination.
Yeah, I totally understand that perspective. I do the same thing, as you might have seen. Like, I sent you the questions for the interview today. I never do that. Even when people ask, I'm just like, I don't know. I figured out the day, But for some reason, I was excited last night, I think, at 1 a.m, finishing your couple episodes. And so I texted you the questions. But it's like, these are things that I think are so important to talk about, and I want to share them. And so there is a much deeper motive than just having a fun conversation with a buddy that I could have off air. It's like, no, I value your perspective, and I want to get some of your ideas and discoveries out in the world, because they've transformed me. And even watching those couple episodes of the show, I'm sitting here now I'm in the Hollywood Hills, at least. So I'm, a bit more wild than your average Angelino, but still I'm going like, I got to get the fuck out of here. I'm like envying your life. I'm having like serious envy. I don't know that I want to wake up at 3 a.m. and go out and snowfish, like ice fishing or something. Maybe not. Yeah, maybe not snow fishing. See, shows you what a city mouse I am. I don't know that that's my path, but definitely just like, wow, what a great life one could have of having a more visceral connection to the planet, man, just to where we came from. And, with all the biohacking and all the stuff I'm into, it's like, the more I learn and the more shit that I try, the more I realize is like, watch the sunset, watch the sunrise, get hot, get cold, eat food that's unadulterated, drink spring water. It's like, the stuff that really moves the needle is just like getting outdoors. I mean, you could say like the ultimate biohack is just get out of your fucking house.
Yeah. And it can be pretty encumbering after a while if you try to recreate that without actually doing the real thing. It takes a lot of equipment, a lot of devices, a lot of like, before you know it, you're like, man, this is a lot of stuff I'm managing, whereas it just sort of happens as a byproduct of a lot of the stuff we do in the show. I mean, this morning, from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., I was sitting in a tree out in the snow, out in the cold, just like already out there, already breathing the fresh air, getting cold, I just want to say too that, I think a lot of people come to my house and they're like, oh, I thought you were like more rural than this. Like compared to LA, we're pretty, the Hollywood Hills, I guess I'm pretty rural, but I got a supermarket right down the road to like take me 5 minutes to get there, I'm not that rural. And a lot of what we're doing in this show, like if we zoom out with the drone, you're like, oh, okay, he's like in a small town area, We're not like, this is not a show where it's like, this episode, I'm in northern Alaska, dropped off by a small Cessna, we're going to be picked up in 42 days. It's not like that. I mean, episode 4, I'm like down in the Florida Keys on Route 1 harvesting iguanas on the side of the road. It's like some of it's fairly urban. So partially I want to motivate people to see that there's stuff they can get involved in pretty easily, like pretty low barrier to entry. As an adult onset hunter, fisher, forager, I was like, oh man, there's a big barrier to entry. And I think I can reduce that barrier a little bit. And the main thing I'm pushing people for is like, you don't got to do all this stuff. Like, just like, can you find one thing that you can do? Like if your one thing is like, there's a raspberry bush down the street and you and your wife and kids go like once a year and harvest the quart of raspberries and you have that little family tradition, like that's that relationship and connection to place. And there's something you look at how much money gets spent on terroir, like look at the wine industry, like the amount of money people spend on terroir. It's one of the only industries where that is really talked about and valued, the taste of place. And man, this lifestyle, I'm telling you, you start to get the flavor of places. It's really interesting where you're sampling the flavors of an ecosystem. You're tasting the places where you are. The cells of your body get made of the places you visit. It's something really powerful metaphorically there that I get really excited about.
I think there's something very powerful, even biologically and scientifically, after having many conversations with Jack Cruz that I've shared with you, who's one of the more controversial guys kind of on the health scene. But his perspective, as out there as it sounds sometimes, really is about being in alignment with our environment. And I'm not going to do it justice, but he explained to me in one of our conversations how this idea of eating locally is not just like, oh, it's cute because we go to the farmer's market. He's like, it's really bad for you to eat foods that have been flown in from another time zone and another season somewhere else. And if you're living in Quebec and you're getting bananas from Ecuador in December, they have has to do with light. And again, I'm totally Flintstonian perspective here, but it has to do with light, and we are beings of light, and the light in the food that you eat from other places and other seasons does not resonate with your body, and your body literally rejects that food. Whereas when you're eating seasonally and locally, there's a bioenergetic match and resonance to the food. And this has a molecular impact on your biology, which I think is so fascinating. So now it's sort of like, I know that after those conversations, I notice more when I go in the grocery store and I'm like, wait, these aren't growing right now. Where are these from?
Where are they growing right now?
Yeah, it's like, wait, mangoes? We don't even have mangoes in Los Angeles,
Yeah, I just think that freshness, when we talk about freshness of food, when we talk about freshness of water and air, I think there's an electrical component to that we'll one day understand better, or maybe it's photonic. And I don't think we have a good language around that just yet, but that's part of what he's talking about. Anyway, I said that one time on stage, just speculatively. I don't like to come out and be like, this is how it is, but I was sort of speculating. And Jack was like, yes, that's what I'm saying. And I was like, oh, we had this like little moment, where we kind of agreed. And I think similarly, so one of the guiding principles at WildFed as an organization is this idea of being made of place. And, I love it. It doesn't work as a tagline because people are like, what does that mean? But when you start to explain it, to be made of place, like most people are made of a whole random assortment of places. I don't mean this dogmatically. I have lots of room for imported food. I think that's like, I don't like creating rules. I've done a lot of that in the past. such a trap. But this idea that your body is made of water from one place, it's made of, fruits from another place, the meats are coming from over here. It's all these different places, and you're living in one place, but building your body out of all these other places, when there's all this food and all this water right here in your food shed and watershed that you can be built out of. And however that works, like you use the language resonance. I don't know what language we'll eventually land on when we finally have a science around this and it's really been explored. Part of it has to do with nutrigenomics. So part of it has to do with the interplay of food in your genes, which is a kind of a new emerging nutritional science that's still in its infancy. Part of it probably does have to do with what you're saying photonically with light levels. Who knows how it is that food and water as information communicate with your body? But I really think that there's something deeply nourishing and satisfying about being made of, at least in large part, of the place where you are. And it's gotten so rare today. Most people are made out of, they wouldn't know where. They'd have to look at the sticker on their piece of fruit to know even where they're being made out of.
It's funny. I remember when we spoke at Neil Strauss's event, and I was just looking at the video for that because I was updating my website. It was in 2015. I'm like, we're on the eve of 2020. I thought, holy crap, it was 5 years ago. I gave my first public talk on the topics of health. And I was so excited to be sharing the stage with you and David Wolf and Jack Cruz and Ben Greenfield, all these big guys that I was a fan of and listening to. And not only did I get a great vote of confidence from you afterward, when I remember exactly what you said, I was like, how'd it go? You go, dude, you killed it. You could totally be doing this. You realize that, right? And I was like, what? I thought this was just like a fun thing to go do at my friend Neil's event. I'll put something together. Anyway, point is, afterward, Jack comes up and kind of taps me on the shoulder, and Jack Cruz famously disagrees with 99.9% of the people in the health industry. He's like a huge contrarian. Yeah. And he comes up and taps me on the shoulder and says, hey man, I just want you to know, everyone here is totally fucking full of shit except you and that guy, Daniel. You're the only two that know.
Oh, no
yeah.
kidding.
You're the only two that know
Cool.
what you're talking about at all.
Wow.
Scientifically. And I was like, God, I'm so unscientific. I was shocked that he, had that perspective. But yeah, he definitely resonated, I think, with both of us because we're both coming from the perspective of let's kind of go back and look at where things came from and where we went astray and do our best while still living as somewhat normal people. Well, how do we get back in alignment with what's just natural? Speaking of going back, now that we've gotten super excited about the new stuff, which I'm pumped about, and we'll give a little more information on that later. But I find your journey so interesting because when I first found you, but you had long hair, you're tattooed all over, and you were, coming out of the raw vegan movement and doing these elixir videos and all this stuff. And I found you to be very compelling and started following you. And then, as you said, you sort of just went off the rails. And next thing you know, you're like, we should be eating lard and bacon, and in the still kind of
got on the rails, I think.
yeah. At least out of that sort of dogmatic scene. So I'd love for you to share, what made you go, wow, I don't want to be a raw vegan anymore. I'm going to start crushing beef liver or whatever.
That scene is so interesting. It's like one of the interesting things about the raw food vegan culture when you're really a part of it is you got kind of two camps. One camp is super, super strict. And a lot of people start there too. They end up in the other camp eventually. It's very strict and quite orthorexic. I mean, these are people who are not well psychologically very often, or start off well psychologically, and then this food journey takes them into somewhere fairly unhealthy fairly quickly. And they feel really good in the beginning because they're on this cleansing diet. But eventually what happens is they start to become malnourished and start to have cognitive issues, I believe, too, and emotional issues that result from living with so many rules. It's quite monastic. The other side of it is deep into psychedelic drugs. I mean, at a level that's quite surprising. And it's quite strange to find that, there's a heavy amount of tobacco smoking. There's a lot heavy partying, staying up all night, lots of stimulants, all these medicines. And eventually you're like, okay, this isn't real healthy either. These people are outwardly telling one story and they're living a different story. And I got, having had the opportunity to be on stage with a lot of the big authors, the big speakers, and all the big names, I started realizing these people were not doing what they were talking about. They get on stage and talk about one thing, and then you'd get behind stage with them and they'd be doing some. There's also quite a sex scene too. I'm sure you kind of have seen some of what I'm talking about. It's like, it's not what people think it is when they're like, oh, green juices. It's like, well, green juices and LSD and sex. And, it's like, it's just was this crazy world. And I was starting to be like, man, this is kind of not really where I wanted to be. Then I started to notice that a lot of the people who were doing the diet were failing at it. Like it was starting to not work anymore. Many of the big names are lying to you that they're vegan at this point. I mean, not you personally, I just mean to the audience here. A lot of them started off vegan and now they've built such a prison around themselves that they can't come clean with the fact that they don't live that way anymore. And they continue to pretend to be. And I was just like really sick of the hypocrisy. Also, something I think we've talked about before is my interest was always in what is a natural diet for people. It wasn't about I wanted all these rules as much as I just wanted to I always felt that if I could figure out what the natural diet for people was, that would be really good for me. And I'd like to pursue that because, if you can think of any animal, when you just go to an encyclopedia, if you get on Wikipedia and you look up any animal, you're like, great white shark. And you pull that up and you just go scroll down. There's going to be a section that says diet. And when you read that, it's going to tell you what great white sharks eat. Right? You do that with every animal, but you go to people, it's like Homo sapien. Diet, it's like, who knows, right? We forgot it's crazy to me, right? We didn't know. It took me a long time to sort that out. And I fell into all of this compelling bullshit about human beings being natural vegans and raw foodists. And I didn't understand that cooking and the control of fire predates Homo sapiens and goes back to species that are in our genus, Homo. They're humans, but they weren't Homo sapiens. They weren't our form. So you can kind of find out, if you trace your way back a little bit, you can find out that they had fire and that fire was given to Homo sapiens from prior species. We learned it from prior species. Also, that we'd been eating meat and hunting far before Homo sapiens even came on the scene 300,000 years ago. It's not like there's this idea in veganism that at some point, you got two kinds of vegans. One type of vegan thinks that this is probably the larger group, that human beings are naturally vegan and that we fell off the wagon at some point and that we've been living in a binge cycle ever since. We've been on a bender eating meat and we're going to only get healthy when we realize that we get back on the wagon and we go vegan again. The other side believes that maybe we weren't in the past, but now with science and agriculture, we can become vegan. That's a different argument. I can address that in a minute. But for those people who think in the past we were naturally vegan, it's like, sorry, there's this whole field of anthropology and archaeology, paleoarchaeology. We just know that's not true. That's just absolutely false. And one of the things we can do right now is look at contemporary hunter-gatherers who are still living in the way that they had lived ancestrally. We can see that they're omnivores. We can look at ancient human feces that's been fossilized. We can look at archaeological sites dating back hundreds of thousands and even millions of years, where we see that ourselves and prior forms of our genus were using hunting implements and cutting implements to butcher animals. This is just who we are, and we were cooking the whole time. So I came across a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Weston Price. I'm sure that's come up in your show over the years. And Weston Price was this turn of the century 1800s to 1900s dentist who was really just trying to figure out why we all had cavities and our teeth were not fitting in our mouth properly. And he went around the world looking at hunter-gatherers and people living their traditional life ways in agriculture. And he found that they had complete dental arches with their teeth all fitting and no real significant cavities until they started to go on to the so-called Western diet. And that changed my perspective really quick, because he's got photographs, from this time period looking at people's teeth. And I started to realize oh, okay, I'm doing this wrong. This vegan thing isn't true. I'm doing it wrong. And, eventually I started doing this thing on stage, because I would get up on these, the 300, 400, 500, sometimes 1,000, 1,500 people in an audience. And I would just do this simple game. I'd go, put your hand up if you know a vegan. You probably see me do this, Luke. Put your hand up if you know a vegan.
Yeah, do it. I love
Everybody's
this one.
hands go up. And then you go, only leave your hand up if you know somebody who's been a vegan for more than 5 years. And you just see this instant half the rooms, the hands drop. And then I go, okay, only leave your hand up if you know somebody who's been a vegan for 10 years. And then you got handful of people left in the room. And then I'll go 15 years, 20 years. And as you start doing that, eventually there's no hands in the air. And I'll say, okay, so nobody knows a lifelong vegan? And it's like, nope. And then I go, so nobody knows a vegan who was raised a vegan their whole life and met another person raised a vegan their whole life and they had kids. And then those kids were raised vegan and those kids had kids. So we have no like population dynamics to look at. We have no proof. In fact, nobody even knows a lifelong vegan. There are more, try to put this in perspective for people. There are more Bigfoot sightings than there are sightings of vegans who've been doing it their entire lifespan. There are more, right? More Yeti sightings. There are more alien encounters. There are more like whatever, pick your thing. There are more people who see unicorns than see lifelong vegans. Like they are a mythical creature. Now that's okay because that means that veganism is currently an experiment, and that's okay. We want to run experiments, and people who want to take part in that experiment should. But what they probably should be wise about is going around telling the whole world that they should all immediately adopt this or they are killers. It's like, oh, whoa, that's an experiment, man. Do the experiment. Run it for a while because you might find in 5 or 10 years you're not doing it anymore, and you got a domino effect of apologies you owe behind you. All the people that you got in their face, criticized them or threw red paint on them or talked about how cold they were or what killers or murderers they were. It's like, man, you're doing an experiment. You can't talk like that to people. It's just not fair. Not until you have proof. And there's no proof. There's never been a society of vegans that's ever existed. There's never been a civilization of vegans that's ever existed. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, maybe I'm doing it wrong. And so, that kind of led to my journey. And Rewild Yourself as a podcast was an exploration of me going, well, what else is like that? Like, okay, that's what happened with food. What is it with sex? What is it with birth? What is it with death? Like, I started getting really interested in like, how come I never see people born or never see people die? Like that's not normal. Like, is that biologically normal? Like, a lot of people when they first, like with hunting, it's a really interesting thing because most people never see anything die or only a couple times in their life. And they're like, well, this can't be right because when I watch it, it feels really emotional to me. It's like, yeah, man, because you never saw it. You would have been desensitized to that by the time you were 3 years old. In any society that existed prior to 1800, like that would just be everyday normal for you. Death every day would just be part of it. And it really brings you to terms with mortality, which is a thing that most people are running from. I mean, you must I know recently you had some ayahuasca experiences. Like you kind of come face to face. DMT brings you face to face with death real quick. You're like, oh, I get it now. I'm just afraid of dying. That's what this whole thing's always been about. That's what I've been doing all this time. I've just been running from the fact that I am in a mortal coil. Oops. People aren't confronted with it because they live really sheltered from that. So anyway, I started a journey toward it. Then I guess like how I ended up hunting, how I ended up doing all these crazy things is the journey of following. Well, a lot of people just give up early, man. It's why businesses fail. It's why, books don't get written or whatever it is. Like people don't follow the thread long enough. If you follow the food thread long enough, I don't know, for me, before you know it, you're out in the woods like harvesting an alligator.
When you defected from that somewhat culty clique that you were running with for all those years, and also I think it's interesting that you're not a guy that started juicing and eating a bunch of vegetable for 6 months and then went, oh, I don't know, this isn't working. You did that shit for 10 years?
A decade, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was a vegetarian for close to 10 years. And, I've told my story about that before on the show, and it didn't do well for me. It was not a good strategy for longevity. But I think that you gave it quite a fair shot. And it's interesting that you then submerged yourself and became a promoter. And then I respect the fact that you had the courage to go, oops, I made a mistake. I'm rethinking this, and just own that and be willing to face so much rejection and opposition from your fan base and your community and really be ostracized. Were you ever, did you ever experience getting death threats or anything that extreme from people that were mad because you were eating animals?
Well, I want to say that one thing I feel really blessed about is I never really had a public platform until I had already stopped being a vegan and already stopped being a raw foodist. In fact, I think the very first YouTube video that ever went up of me was me talking about honey, and that was to a bunch of vegans trying to sell them on this idea of honey, But yeah, for 10 years before that, I was very vocal, but I wasn't a public persona yet, So thankfully, I never had to make that transition. I never had to walk any of that back. Instead, but I was in that community and I was speaking in that community. Man, people have resonated to what I've been saying for a long time. I get mostly really awesome feedback. I've had trolls for sure. A couple people who are like, sometimes I think about a remora. That's that type of fish that hangs out attached to a shark. You get the shark.
I've seen them, but I didn't know what they were called.
You can take one out of the water. Like sometimes when I'm fishing down in Florida, we'll catch one and you can take that thing and stick it to the roof of the boat. It'll just suction cup right up there. They got like a suction cup on the top of their head. That's like some of the people that I've dealt with, trolls. They're like, oh, I like where that shark's headed. Just attached to you and attack you in a way to try to get, views, try to get attention or whatever. I just like ignore them, I play offense, not defense. I don't think I've had a lot of death threats though. I see that happening to people. It'll be interesting to see now with WildFed because people are going to see me actually in the act of killing things. I think I present it in a pretty reverent and without getting new agey, not getting like too out there with it. I think I present it with a good balance of reverence, but also like solidity in who I am and why I do it. But I'm sure that is going to come. But I mean, I don't take any of that. Vegans are going to come kill me. Like kidding me? Like, okay, come on over. Let's get down, bro. Like, let's see how you roll. Like, what's your weapon of choice? I'm curious. Like celery, a pie with cayenne pepper in, like they did to Lear Keith. Like, it doesn't, I don't take it very seriously because I think that they're just keyboard warriors. I've never heard of like vegans actually doing anything like that for real, but it is fascinating how some of the most, aggressively violent trolls are the people who profess themselves to live in a non-violent way. I mean, I think it's strange.
I think there's a strange hypocrisy that's very prevalent now, socially, culturally, and obviously politically. It's like politically now we're seeing so much division, right? And there's this whole sect of society in America that we hate the people that hate people. It's like what used to be the tolerant, sort of liberally minded sect that you would call the left are now like the most repressive and hateful against the so-called hateful people on the other side.
Fully out of the closet now. They're fully out of the closet. Yeah. I had no idea. Part of why I shut my podcast down too, I had a lot of reasons. One piece was having talked about, because my podcast was about, obviously I've got the new show now, WildFed, but Rewild Yourself was about the idea of emulating how natural peoples had been living on the planet. Like, how do we take some of those ideas into the modern world? And I was exploring a lot of the philosophy. And around 2016, I think personally, this is just my view of it. I think we'll look back and be like, oh, that's when the cold Civil War started in the United States, right? It's just everything changed. And a lot of the things that I was talking about started to sound too much like what I felt radical leftist people were talking about. And I was like, oh, that's not how I mean that. And I was like, I got to get out of the philosophical side of this and get into the real practical side of it because I didn't want to come off like I was in support of some of this stuff that I'm seeing now. I mean, I'm amazed. As a liberal person, I'm amazed at what I'm seeing from that side of, I hate to say the aisle, but my opinion has always been planes have two wings, a right one and a left one. You use both wings to fly. You take one wing away, you crash. And this idea that you're going to destroy the left is going to destroy the right or the right's going to destroy the left. It's like, no. It's like being like, oh, I'm going to remove my right brain. I'm going to remove my left brain. I only want one hemisphere. It's like, nah, I'd like to have both intact and functioning. They balance each other, But it's pretty crazy what we're watching now. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting wrapped up in that because when you start talking about things like sociology, which is one of the things I was really fascinated by, and right now is not, for me, not the time. I don't want to take on that fight. It's not what I care about,
I'm lucky enough to, be able to give very light commentary about those things without getting too involved because I don't have, this isn't a show about social activism or politics or anything like that. But I have to indicate at times, I think, viewpoints to that end because of the censorship and things like that are going on as a result. And that's when it gets kind of close to home. To me, I really don't think whoever the president is makes much of a difference, or at least until recently. And all of that, kind of just observing from the complete, like, zoomed out perspective that I have. But the thing that kind of makes me nervous is when it starts to get into the First Amendment and also the Second Amendment. Oh, yeah. These are two foundational pieces of Western culture and American culture and what actually created our society. And when those start going into dangerous waters, it's like, I'm going to at least mention it, even though I might not be qualified or ready to put myself out there.
I get it. I'm going to obviously, by default, I'll be Second Amendment activist because I shoot guns in my show, And I mean, the purpose that I'm using them for is not the purpose of the Second Amendment, right? The Second Amendment wasn't about hunting. It's to protect the First Amendment, essentially. But, an interesting thing, Luke, that's come up for me, you were asking if I get death threats. And worse than the vegan trolls actually have been more like the Antifa type trolls that I've dealt with. And what's happened is there's this contingent who would come at me and be like, well, why are you not using your platform to speak out against racism? And I'd be like, well, I hate racism. I believe that all the different types of humans are all adaptations to the planet, and each one is beautiful. Like, we need all of these different races. We need all of these different types of people. I love them all. It's just my thing's about food. And they'd be like, I've had people call me a Nazi because I'm not speaking out against racism, when I'm like, that's not what my work is about, though. Like, where would I fit that into my thing? Like, it's not what my thing is about. It's like, that's a fight other people have taken on. That's not my fight. My fight's on food. That'd be like me going to an activist for, equal rights amongst the races and me being like, you're a Nazi. You're not speaking out about food. They'd be like, what? That's not my thing. So I've had like some of that come at me, but only, like I said, in these last couple of years, because I think a lot of people have like kind of lost their marbles a little bit and things have gotten really hectic. And it's unfortunate, man, because what I think is so cool about hunting and gathering is it's one of the things that ties every race together. It ties all types of people together. I mean, you could be any race, any gender, any orientation. Your ancestors were hunter-gatherers. This practice of gathering food off the landscape binds all people groups together. No matter where you go in the world, from the furthest Arctic Inuit and Inupiat people who are hunting and gathering there, to the people in the equatorial jungles who are hunting and gathering there, to peoples of the desert, to peoples in all continents, all colors, all of it, right? It's like, this is just a universal human thing. So I kind of like that, because this division that we're feeling right now, I feel like a lot of it feels fake to me. It's like, part of it too, I live in the Northeast, man. I mean, we were like the Underground Railroad, right? We fought and died, the people of the Northeast. We fought and died over this issue of slavery, like to stop it, So I don't know if just because I live up here, I don't see this, what people are talking about. But boy, I would think those people are a little bit more hardcore to me than the vegans, because the vegans come off as like, I just know that they're kind of soft, They're not, when they act aggressive, you're like, dude, you're not. You don't have enough testosterone really to come at me. But some of the like hardcore activists these days are like,
I'm going to lose so many listeners over this conversation.
I say it as someone who did it for 10 years. So I have like special exemptions.
No, I know,
I have a hall
dude.
pass
I know.
To say it, And you know what's going to happen too is people are going to put up a bunch of, what about this vegan bodybuilder though? You're going to get that stuff. It's like, yeah,
I mean, listen, I am fundamentally a libertarian, and I believe in sovereignty for human beings. I believe in sovereignty for nations. And I wish that we could just all have no walls and borders and everyone sing fucking kumbaya. But that's not the way that civilizations have been set up. We're not there yet. And so it's like, within civilizations, within culture, you have individuals, and those individual rights, to me personally, this is my belief, are more important than the collective rights, right? So I'm all for someone, you can eat, your lawn for the rest of your life, and I support you and love you if that's what you choose to do. I think why I get a kick out of these more provocative conversations that I can have with people like you is I don't like being told what to do, or that I'm a bad person, or that I'm wrong, because of the way that I'm living my life. And I don't think that it's fair or ethical to shame, threaten, go after people and try to hurt other people because of the way that they're living. And I think I'm also just like, I have a very strong sense for hypocrisy, and hypocrisy is dishonesty. And I really resent dishonesty and disingenuous points of view that don't tell the whole story. For example, when you talk about racial equality, for example, and you put that in the context with living a life as a hunter-gatherer, I never hear anyone getting up in arms and fighting Native Americans that choose to go out and hunt and eat animals. In other words, I don't see activists going after indigenous peoples around the world for their life ways that
they
include...
get a special pass.
that include taking the lives, but it's like the activists that are anti-hunter, anti-gun exclusively go after Caucasian males, especially if you happen to be in the Midwest, Northeast, Northwest, anywhere off the coastal.
Appalachia.
Yeah, And so I look at that and I'm just like, well, okay, so if I had, more melanin in my skin, would I get a pass on going and slaughtering a deer if I was proposing to do that in a reverent way? In other words, there's this sort of supposition, and you could speak more to this, I'm sure, and I'd love to go there, that, and this is coming from someone who was raised by an avid hunter. As you know, my dad, he hunted since he's 5 years old, or maybe even 4. When he could shoot a gun, he was hunting. And so he has just a very, just a beautiful perspective on ecology and animals and how the whole thing works. So I was kind of brought up with that, even though I never subscribed to it because I was a California kid that grew up with my mom. But it's like seeing my dad as a hunter and his friends, these aren't a bunch of slack-jawed, ignorant, racist, homophobic, xenophobic rednecks, man. These are like people that really care about the land, that are kind, non-racist people. And I think that oftentimes the sect of citizens that are the hunters get vilified as these ignorant
and stereotyped by people who are saying not to stereotype people.
Right. So
it's very ironic.
Yeah. So it's these types of things. I'm just like, it makes my head explode because I'm seeing things from kind of two sides of it. I think having the advantage of being raised in a very liberal culture in California by a very liberal mom, and having a dad in Colorado who, is kind of living off the land, and I would say politically came from a slightly more conservative perspective, but was also intelligent enough to be inclusive and a kind, thoughtful person, albeit while he's shooting the shit out of animals all over the place.
I get the question. And, I'm a major nerd for the work of Frank Herbert. He wrote the book Dune and the whole series, the Dune series. This is some stuff when you read it. It's novel, but it's on another level intellectually.
Oh, I read the Dune books when I was a kid. Yeah.
Some heavy duty stuff. I go through them like once a year. In it, he says this thing that I just wanted to bring up real quick. He says, scratch a liberal and you'll find underneath the surface a closet aristocrat. Scratch a conservative and you'll find somebody afraid of change. And it's like, yeah, I would agree with both of those statements. And you need both. You need both of these things. They're toggles. It's unfortunate, the stereotyping that's going on right now. In my podcast on Rewild Yourself called Why I'm Not a Vegan, which has moved the needle for a lot of people, man. That one had some impact. I've got a lot of people, it was years ago I recorded that, but I get feedback constantly from people who are like, I just interviewed with a woman the other day who's been a vegan for 8 years, and she's on a 30-day carnivore diet challenge. And I was like, wow, that's one thing to the other thing. She's like, I opened my mind to it because of your podcast. And I was like, man, and in that podcast, I present several arguments for why I believe veganism is not as viable as people think. And one of the things I say in that show is like, would you be willing as a vegan to go with me around the country to visit Native American, or in Canada, they say First Nations reservations, and to talk to the people there about how for the last 10,000 years, 14,000 years that they've been on this continent, that they were murdering and living wrong, and that they should be vegetarians. Would you be willing to go tell them that? Because probably not, right? Probably not. You're probably not willing to go to indigenous people and tell them that they are doing it wrong. You just want to tell people in your culture that. And I'll get this interesting thing from time to time too. Like I'll get these messages from people that say like, I shouldn't be foraging without the permission of Native people, which I always find really odd. Given the kind of things that are going on the planet, it's like, okay, what about like Dow Chemical strip mining over there? Do they need to get permission? I'm just picking fiddleheads. Like I need to go get permission to do that. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't really make sense at this point in history that I am the one, like same with vegans when they come at you, where it's like, man, there are some fights that you could be fighting. Like if you believe, because I do understand when you're vegan and you have this belief that this is murder. Like if I knew somebody was committing murders, like in my neighborhood, for instance, I would be compelled to intervene on the behalf of the innocent, right? You knew you had a mass murderer in your neighborhood. It's like, you got to do something about that. I would feel a moral obligation. So that's what they believe. And so of course their attacks against you which seem very bizarre in the moment, are coming from where they are, how they are seeing things. But it's like, okay, so you're worried about the one animal I kill and not why are you not at McDonald's right now dealing with that fight? Isn't that a more important fight than trolling me on the internet? Like, how am I important enough in the grand scheme of animals dying? Why are you coming at me? Why are you not at the soy farm where you get your tofu from? Because their combines are running down thousands of rabbits a year, and because they have paid hunters there killing off the deer that are eating the soybeans. Why are you coming at me? Like, doesn't it make more sense to look in the mirror a little bit? Because you're involved in it too. We're all involved in it. So it seems a little strange and unfounded. Man, we're in a delicate time. It's like, I feel so terrible about some of the abuses that have happened to different people groups around the world, and in particular here in North America. But that's like so unrelated to me foraging, me hunting. It's like, I just don't see those as connected. So it's a confusing time, man.
We'll be right back at you after this brief but important announcement. All right, folks, I'm about to bust out one of my secrets here. You ready for this? People often wonder how I'm able to record sometimes 3 or 4 podcasts in one day and stream them all on social media and do all of the crazy things I do. If you follow me on Instagram, my life is quite busy and somehow I managed to keep it together. Well, my secret weapon, or at least one of them, is the 4 Sigmatic Lion's Mane coffee. Now, I don't always have time to brew up some whole beans, put them in the French press, put the butter in there, do the whole thing, make myself that fatty kind of elixir. But what I do always have time for is to bust out one of the little Lion's Mane coffee packets from 4 Sigmatic, throw that in some hot water, even sometimes when I'm like in a rush and just need to make things happen, some cold water, shake it up, stir it up, blend it up, and I'm good to go. Now, what's cool about the Lion's Mane coffee is that it's an instant coffee, but it doesn't have any of the toxins of like your grandma's like Folgers instant coffee. By the way, don't ever eat that stuff. Super, super toxic. Instant coffees are generally really bad for you, but not this one. What's really cool about the 4 Sigmatic instant coffee is that you get like a balanced stimulation. So it's coffee without the jitters. The Lion's Mane sort of calms down the hit of caffeine. So that's why I really like this product. This has been used for a long time by Buddhist monks to help with focus during meditation. And this is just a beautiful mushroom and a modern day favorite for someone like me who likes to get creative, but also stay focused. And all of 4 Sigmatic's mushrooms are dual extracted, meaning that you get the water soluble and fat soluble nutrients. And in non-geeky terms, that just means that they're really badass and that they do it right. So if you want to check it out, which I highly recommend you do, here's what's up. You go to 4sigmatic.com/Luke Story. Again, that's 4sigmatic.com/Luke Story. If you throw some of that Lion's Mane coffee in your shopping cart and then enter the code Luke Story, you're also going to save 15% off. That's 4sigmatic.com/Luke Story. Your discount code is also Luke Story. Enjoy. And now back to the interview. In support of you and in defense, in one of the episodes I was watching last night where you guys were foraging those fiddleheads up on the river, and you and Arthur Haynes, your botanist kind of mentor, amazing guy, who's, by the way, I'd encourage people to not only listen to your new podcast, but also go back and cherry pick the Rewild Yourself podcast. There's some great conversations with Arthur Haynes, who was on the show, but I found his perspective so beautiful. He was talking about, generationally how the native peoples for thousands of years have been stewards of that land. And in fact, the way that you guys were foraging and now you're educating future foragers to do is reseeding and not over picking and not killing off these blooms of leeks and any plants that you're out foraging. I mean, I think that the way that you're indicating to people that this can be done, and obviously it's not accessible to everyone, and we'll talk about the scalability and the limits of that. But I thought that you and Arthur had a deep reverence for not only the land, but for the people who were stewards of that land for time immemorial before you got there, and that you're actually carrying on the traditions in a much more respectable way than perhaps even the organic farm down the road that's just like, all right, I got a few acres, let's plow this shit down and grow some corn or kale or whatever, It's like so much of it is in the details and in the intention and the level of consciousness with which someone is doing that, and to give a blanket judgment that, hey, you're European, you're white, you came here, we decimated these populations of native peoples, and therefore now you just have to go shop at Walmart forever. I don't think that's a thoughtful approach.
Or viable or sustainable. Like, don't you not want me to do that?
So yeah, it's just, I think both of us, we're kind of born rebels. And so that's why I love having these conversations with you, because we can think out of the box. I also, an interesting observation that I've made, I want to get your take on this, is that, and you guys listening, man, like, you got to believe, for me, and I probably can speak for you, if whatever you're eating for your diet is like your identity and it's making you feel good, like, I'm all for that. It's none of my business. My role and what I enjoy doing, and I just get a kick out of, is really dissecting things and looking at it from every angle. And that's also coming from someone who, as a kid, used to cry when I had to kill a fish that I pulled out of the river. So it's like, I'm not where you are. Like, I'm still very domesticated, very soft. Even like in your show, you shot 2 turkeys with 1 shot, which, by the way, great shot. And then you have to walk up and break their necks and like put them out of their misery, and they're still shaking. And even in the show, you're like, hey, I know this might seem a little harsh, but this is actually the most humane way to do it. Even watching that, I'm kind of like, oh, God damn, could I do that? I don't know. But I'll go to Erewhon and buy the turkey that probably lived a much shittier life on a farm and was perhaps killed even in a less humane way, etc. But what I find interesting is, I always feel like I have to give those disclaimers, because I know a lot of people that are choosing to live that lifestyle listen to the show, and it's like, I'm not trying to attack them or make them feel bad. I'm just like wanting to open people's minds. And one of the things I've always found strange is that humans seem to have a hierarchy in terms of this, what you could call perhaps speciesism, where we don't want to, we're okay with killing a cow, but not a dog. And some of us are okay perhaps with killing a chicken, but not a cow. And some of us are okay with tilling some acreage of land and killing, as you said, thousands of rabbits and rodents and reptiles and amphibians and birds and insects in order to grow some kale. And it's interesting the way that we've developed this value system and hierarchy of some creatures sentient or not. And one could argue that all living things are sentient to some degree, that we have a value system where this is okay and that's not okay. How do you think we get that hierarchy, speciesism point of view?
Man, there's a lot. That's a lot to unpack. There's a lot there. I want to use the word kingdomism too, because you have these different kingdoms of life. Plants are a kingdom of life, plantae, and animalia is a kingdom of life. And there's a few others. So let's just take those 2. The dominant belief amongst a lot of vegetarian people is that animal life has more value than plant life. This is interesting to me because a lot of the times the people who will identify around vegetarianism and veganism tend to be against the idea of hierarchies. There's this whole thing right now about hierarchy and about patriarchy and all these ideas. And I would agree, by the way, one of the things that really gives me like deep respect and reverence for the way that indigenous peoples have lived around the world, when we kind of look at, I'm no anthropologist, but when I read the ethnographies, when I read the reports of anthropologists, when you read these firsthand accounts, you see that those cultures did not have as much hierarchy built into them as ours do. People were considered sovereign individuals. Now, that doesn't mean you didn't have rules. You had taboo enforced by the tribe. There's things that you do and don't do, but they didn't have hierarchies. It wasn't like the appeal to authority that we have in this culture. This idea that like, well, he's the expert, he's the policeman, he's the, whatever it is that gives them the reason that they are above you in this hierarchy, right? But for some reason, those same people against social hierarchies have these biological hierarchies, and they tend to favor charismatic animals. So you will get a lot more outrage about killing a bear than a blobfish. Blobfish just has no charisma. That's a fish, by the way, if people want to look it up. Very unattractive fish by our typical aesthetic. People are much more reverent about lions and zebras and giraffes than they are about mosquitoes, right? Like most vegans I know kill mosquitoes, and they don't feel bad about it. They drive cars and the grill of their car is full of dead insects. They don't seem to really be bothered by that. They're bothered by certain types of animals, which means they've organized life into a sort of a pyramid. And it seems to me to be organized around the idea that human beings kind of at the top of that. So the next animal that you would have the most compassion for would probably be the chimpanzees and orangutans and gorillas. And then under that would be sort of, bears and things that kind of look more anthropomorphic. And then under that, you sort of get this thing, and down at the bottom would be your mosquitoes and such, right? And it's this idea that, some life forms have more value. It's interesting if you step back and you think, well, each one is alive. Does each one have is it possible that life has equal value? Or is there really like a hierarchy of life? I mean, we seem to put people at the top of it because we have really different rules about treating people versus how we treat animals. I think that people are speciest, but I think they're also kingdomist in that they think plants aren't sentient. Yet when the deeper we delve into plant biology and botany, it's like you start to realize like plants have quite a lot of awareness and pre-exist, animals. And algae pre-exist. They're the algae, the seaweeds, they invented sex. I mean, they're the first dimorphic. So it's like, to me, all life is sacred, all of it. And here's one of the things that I think people get confused about and they get a little caught up in. I think your typical like animal rights activist or even a person who's just like really compassionate about, let's just step away from this activism and veganism and all that for a second. Let's just say a person who struggles with the idea of killing for food tends to be very focused on the individual animal. And the person who stewards the species through conservation efforts like hunting tend to be more focused on the species health, not necessarily about the individual. So what you'll see very often is people will make choices that are bad for the species because they want to make choices that are good for the individual. You'll see this in sociology all the time. You see this with people all the time. It's like you make a choice that is good for one, but bad for all. And so I think that sometimes they're so focused on, it's like when you remove an individual from the population, we have this idea in biology called non-additive mortality or compensatory mortality versus additive mortality. Compensatory mortality means, like, let me give you an example. In Maine here, we have 35,000 black bears. Every year, hunters kill about 3,000 black bears. That's less black bears than die of natural causes. It's non-additive mortality. We can kill those 3,000 bears every year. And actually what's happened in Maine is every year the bear population's grown. It's actually increasing even though we kill 3,000 bears. The animal rights activist is very focused on the individual bear that dies. Hunters are much more focused on the population of bears. And so what we've done, hunters have achieved this because our hunting money, our dollars spent on our tags, our dollars spent, there's an 11% tax on the hunting equipment that we buy that goes into conservation. We are putting all this money back in. That money has been used to grow the bear population through field work and habitat and all of this. We've been able to increase the bear population. So to me, the net benefit is better. It's like, I care more about bears than I do about a bear. Me eating a bear doesn't affect the population, but it does feel hard for somebody who's like, yeah, but that bear. And I get that, but that's not how I look at it. I'm looking at, and it gets harder when I look at humans that way too. It's like, hey, some people die. That just happens. Like, people die in all kinds of ways. It's sad. It's terrible when you're connected to that person at intimate level. But what's more important is humans in general. Sometimes you get the impression that someone would save an animal, even if it meant the loss of the species. It's an interesting moral question. So I think that one of the ways we've been talking today about ways people break down in these two sides, that's one of the sides is like, what's more important to you, deer or a deer? Because it's hunters who've actually been bringing back all the game in North America through a whole host of efforts, which I could explain, but don't want to bore you with. But we have been the ones working on conservation efforts to bring back animals that were largely extirpated from the continent. And now they're back, and it's hunters who did that.
I definitely, I have some line of questioning that I want to get into that I'm going to circle back to around that, specifically because as I said, I've had the fortunate vantage point of seeing things from like a hippie Californian. Also to spend a lot of time with my dad and his hunter rancher friends my whole life, also in Colorado, and seeing the reverence that they have for the management of land and wildlife. It's really fascinating. I definitely want to get into that because I sense that many people living in cities that are, with all the best intentions, get into activism around the conservation of animals, spend very little time actually out with the people doing it on the land, which is interesting. So we'll get into that for sure. in terms of like, what do you do? Let's say if you're choosing to live a plant-based lifestyle, and you've decided that you feel better on a vegan diet for a period of time. I mean, what do you do about your pets? Like if you have cats and dogs and you love them, do you think it's fair to try to put your dog on a broccoli diet, or would your dog get a pass on animals being killed for your dog because you feel it's more biologically appropriate for them? Yeah, I've always found that interesting too, because
it's such a leading question. You know the answer to that. I make my dog food, right? So one of the things you'll hear from people there's a huge movement of people who were vegans who are hunting now. It's actually one of the fastest growing demographics, at least from what I can tell. You get a lot of foodies who followed, maybe they were vegans, and then they end up, you see this very common pattern. Vegans or vegetarians, they end up getting onto the paleo kind of diet. And before you know it, they're working their way back from the farmer's market to the field, and they're wanting to hunt. I don't remember what I was going to say now. That one of the things you'll hear those folks say is like, I want to use the entire animal. And it's very difficult to do that when you have no background in it. So let's say you were part of a native culture where that was something that was never lost. You might learn some of that. Although realistically, nobody uses every part of every animal. You'll hear, that saying you hear all the time, Native Americans used every part of the animal. It's like Native Americans had uses for every part of animals, but they didn't use every part of every animal. It's so unrealistic. So ridiculously unrealistic, but it's an aesthetic that a lot of people bring when they start hunting. It's difficult to do because in the beginning, you don't even know what to do with the meat itself, no less like what to do. What do I do with the spleen? It's like very, so it takes a while to learn all that. One of the benefits of having a dog has been that I'm able to take a lot of the stuff I don't use, and I make my dog food. So 2-3 days ago here, I had 75 pounds of meat and fat and organs thawing in my bathtub, and I grind it all. I run it through a mixer, and I make individual bags of dog food, and those will last about 3 months, and then I'll do it again. So when I take out of the animal what I'm going to use and what me and my wife are going to use, and everything else, bones, for instance, if I'm not using a bone for stock, obviously we keep bones for ourselves too. But my dog literally eats them, like chews them up. They're gone at the end. Like little shards will remain of certain very osteous parts of those bones, but otherwise my dog eats them. My dog is a carnivore. If I try to just earlier today, I was eating a piece of broccoli. It's like winter here. I'm not really foraging much plants, I have some wild plants that we've been able to put up for the winter, but at this point of the year, like I'm like everybody buying food. And I'm just offering this piece of broccoli to my dog, and she'll come over because she thinks all magic goodness flows from my hands, right? I think my dog imagines that I can just conjure treats in my hands. Like, I don't think she fully understands I have to get them. She just, if something's moving in my hand, she wants to check it out. So I'll hold out the broccoli, and she comes over and she sniffs it. And then she does this funny thing. She turns her head away. It's like, just not food for her, Yeah. Not food for her. Now, my dog will eat grass. My dog will eat a house plant if she's having digestive problems. So I think that dogs have times where they want plant fiber, but my dog is not a vegetarian. Dogs are wolves. Cats are obligatory. They are obligate carnivores. I mean, it's really interesting. I had this guest on my show recently, Deb Perkins, who was her career was as a bear biologist, and did some amazing work. It's a very cool podcast if you're interested in learning about bears, and the real story kind of how.
Oh yeah, that one already came out.
She's
right?
Cool, right? Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
So at the end, though, she wanted to tuck in this piece. She really wanted to talk about the loss of songbirds here in the United States. Well, a huge part of that is because of cats, right? It's like house cats. Like, you can feed your cat a vegetarian diet, and then your house cat goes out and kills songbirds. The number of birds that are dying in the United States because of house cats is so outrageous that if people understood it, we would start to put regulations on cats. And what's the solution? You can keep your cat in the house. You can have like a prisoner cat. I mean, what's the solution? These are carnivores that we've adapted, barely domesticated, adapted to our homes. They're not vegetarians. So if you're going to want a vegetarian cat, you better lock that cat in the house, because these animals you just take a little laser beam and move it on the floor, and you see that cat goes instantly into hunt mode, right? The idea that you're going to feed your animals a vegetarian diet, I think, is animal abuse. Pretty simple, I'm not massively affected by it, but I do think it's abuse. And it leaves open a question. I don't think we need to explore it, but it's like, if humans are omnivores, is feeding a child a vegan diet abuse? I think at one point in the future, we may have laws pertaining to that. We'll see how it goes, but studies are kind of coming out now showing that, hey, this might not be really good for kids. So it's interesting. It's not just with your pets, you know?
Well, in terms of the health implications of certain fat-soluble nutrients that are derived from animal-sourced foods, I've always found it interesting. And again, coming from someone that, you know, I wasn't raw vegan like you for 10 years, but vegetarian, is that I've thought about, well, if you need to take certain supplements in order to kind of prop up that diet, and if you're raising a kid on the diet for moral reasons or what you believe to be, optimal health strategy, and you have to supplement, there's kind of an indication there that perhaps that's not the optimal diet, because an optimal diet wouldn't need to be propped up by exogenous synthetic B vitamins, vitamin A, et cetera, some of those things that come from animal food. So I find that interesting. And, again, someone that's coming from that world also, and was just kind of like, wow, when I started drinking bone broth and kind of eased my way back into animal foods, I just started feeling so much better. And I've met so many people. I mean, so many people, and I'm sure you have even to a higher degree in your career and life, but I'll be at Bel Campo, like where I go get my meat, and I'll just start chatting with someone. But anyway, I'll run into people there, and oftentimes they're younger women, and we'll just start chatting. Oh, I have a podcast, this and that. We start talking about health and food, and I've met many a recovering vegan that those two most common issues I think that seem to take place is that they become infertile, they stop menstruating, and their hormones just get wrecked. And then I've also met a number of other people whose teeth begin to turn translucent and eventually just kind of rot and start to fall out after a number of years.
Yeah, or they have children that are born, and when their teeth come in, their teeth are already rotting, or already decaying as they come through the gum line. I've seen that too.
Yeah, so that's trippy. But back to my own sort of moral dilemma.
And the vegans will say, well, they weren't doing it right. It's like, well, if it's that hard to do, can it be a natural good thing? Shouldn't it be? Why is it that if they just that doesn't happen if you just even eat like random CAFO beef? That doesn't happen. So how is it so hard to do it right?
Right.
That's an interesting question. Like, why would it be so hard? That's to figure out the right balance of what you need to mix together to pull it off.
That's interesting. And I think the reason that I first went vegetarian was because I started to get into spirituality and meditation. I started to become more conscious, more compassionate, more in touch with my heart, and the idea of an animal having to suffer so that I could be full and have a tasty meal just didn't jive with me. And then as I started to learn more about health, this is going back in the mid 90s when I was doing this experiment. And at that time, the availability of farmers markets and knowledge about pasture raised animals and animals that are raised more naturally on their natural diet wasn't as prevalent. I'm sure there were farmers markets and things and on the fringes, but it wasn't known. So it's
a lot less then. A lot less.
Yeah. Either you were a vegetarian or vegan, or you ate factory farm meat. And I remember seeing a documentary back in the day I think it was called Earthlings. And it was this sort of animal cruelty kind of propaganda film. And they had all these hidden camera footage of just animals being treated horrifically in these factory farms. And I was just, I can't support this. I'm going to eat just Indian food and whatever, I'll eat anything to not participate in that. And so I think that's, where a lot of people now think of all animal foods being raised in a way that's so unconscious and so demonic, frankly, that they're just like opting out of the whole thing. What I've been able to experience without going as far as you have into, the landscape and doing things in a truly natural way, but is getting a visceral relationship with my farms, like specifically Bel Campo. I went there and, went to their slaughterhouse and went and touched the pigs that would eventually become quite possibly the bacon I'm cooking in my kitchen. And I really got on a spiritual level, I had to be able to be okay with that by getting as close as I could. Now, when you go to the slaughterhouse, because of USDA regulations, you can't be in there when they're doing it. But I saw the whole process and how it works. And the sense that I got too, just on the slaughterhouse piece, was that those cows that are being slaughtered that eventually end up in my refrigerator are actually suffering way less than an animal that dies of predation out in the wild, right? So like a deer that goes down because 10 coyotes gangbang it, like it's a cow suffering a lot less than that.
Well, it's alive.
Right. So there were realizations of that nature there. But then I started to look at like, well, why even is that? Even being in that slaughterhouse going, I get it. Like this is the lesser of evils. And my body just, it's either me or them kind of thing. Like my body just breaks down if I don't eat this stuff. So it's kind of like, well, I'm not going to go like orthorexic and torture myself and have my health decline so that a cow doesn't die. I kind of had to choose. But then I started looking at, well, why, does my dad have such an easy time taking the life of an animal? And he's also a very compassionate, kind, intelligent person. And why is this so hard for me? And I kind of went back to, and I think you've talked about this, that because I wasn't part of the food system in that sense, in a natural way when I was very young. In other words, I wasn't being breastfed in a tribal setting as a hunter-gatherer and watching chickens just get their heads cut off and gutted all day around me so that those chickens didn't become like a little chick I saw in a cartoon. And even when I went bear hunting with my dad when I was a kid, and I forget I think they either killed or chased away the mama bear. And so two cubs, got treed basically in a really tall evergreen type tree. And my dad's buddy went up with a chainsaw and just sawed off the top of the tree to get them down to kind of set them free or whatever. And one of them got impaled on the way down and just blood and guts everywhere. And I'm looking at a baby bear. And what I'm seeing as a kid was like my teddy bears. I'm seeing Yogi Bear. I'm seeing this human with fur and that's a little more buff and walks on all fours,
Ewok.
Yeah, an Ewok. And it's like, it was just like, it was a horror show. And then we ended up, one of the bears lived. We ended up taking it home and raising it for a while in the hound kennel. And it was like our pet bear until it got too big to do that.
That mom would have come back for those cubs, man. I don't understand that story.
I'll have to ask my dad what exactly happened, because maybe we didn't take the mama bear home as I recall. So, I mean, I know a mother bear would never just bail on her cubs. So I got to ask him what happened.
Yeah, because just for people listening, like we have a strong ethic in the bear hunting world of never shooting a sow that has cubs, and we don't shoot cubs. I mean, that's just really like a clear ethic that's there. So I just want to make sure that I tease that apart, those subtleties there. But go on.
So it's a long way of saying that I still have yet to completely reconcile the fact that I feel the need to eat animal products, but am still a bit disconnected from it, and I'm not in a place where you are, or where...
If I could just jump in on it, because I think I kind of get where this is going. If you saw where your iPhone was being produced, you'd be like, I can't really be a part of this. Like when you see the conditions that people are working in, if you saw where the materials for that were coming from, you'd be like, man, this is like, there's a lot going on. The fashion industry, how about that? Like if we actually went and saw the pollution, the effluent coming out of the, textile mill where our clothes are produced, we'd be like, oh, there's a lot going on in the world that we are not accustomed to see. We get only the shiny packaging, right? One of the big differences is a lot of those things are extremely destructive and there's no precedent for them. But hunting is this thing that goes back millions of years for our species. I mean, chimpanzees hunt today, right? Our closest relative. We have done this since we were, before our genus even came into existence, right? When we were Australopithecines, right? They were scavenging and potentially hunting. And then as soon as Homo comes on the scene, our genus, we're hunting. So that's a natural thing. And when we see that, it's really shocking to us. But there's a lot of things that'd be shocking to us if we just saw what was underpinning our lifestyle. So I think it's like part of it has to do with desensitization that naturally occurs. But there's a lot of things that if we saw them, we would be pretty shocked. And people just go about their days, right? When it comes to
ignorance is bliss.
Yeah,
kind of
man.
thing.
There's an old movie about that called Metropolis. It's really fascinating, like an old black and white silent film. The thing about the gore side of it, when you first go out hunting, like in the beginning, it's quite shocking because you have this like childlike mind. It's never seen this stuff, right? And I think what it is it brings you face to face with the fact that you are made of the same stuff. Your meat and organs and bones. And you're like, oh, that's me. I'm made of jelly here. I'm really vulnerable. This could happen to me. It's kind of like you have to really face that stuff down. And in the beginning, it's like you're cringing because you've been sheltered from this thing. I mean, how comfortable were you the first time you had sex? Your heart's beating really fast. You're nervous. You're like feeling like like all this weirdness. You've never done it before. All this emotions are going through you. The first time that you hunt and you successfully harvest an animal, it's like an altered state of consciousness. You have all these emotions come through you. In part, you're very happy and excited. In part, you're unsure of how you feel about what you've done and you're emotional. In part, you're feeling connected to your ancestry. And in part, you're worried about how people are going to receive it. And you want to take a photo, but you're not sure if that's ethical. You're like, I don't want to be one of those guys, but kind of do want. I want to commemorate this moment. And you want to take time and look at the animal, but you don't want the people with you to think you're being weird. And all this stuff you've got tears in your eyes, but you're smiling and all this stuff comes over you, right? And of course, the second time it's less and the third time it's less. And you start to just integrate the experience. And eventually you're like, it doesn't faze you anymore. I remember my wife, who's a elementary school teacher from Canada. Okay. So that kind of gives some perspective. Like she probably, this is not what she grew up around. She's in Montreal, working with kids her whole career. I remember in the beginning when she would see some of this stuff, it was so hard for her to look at. And now, she'll come out to the garage where I'm cutting, I'm skinning off a deer hide and I'm breaking the animal down. And it's like, we're just talking and she's hanging out now. It didn't take that long before that like gruesome, horrific side of it suddenly doesn't look that way at all. And one of the really interesting things is when there's a certain point in the processing of an animal where the animal goes from looking like the animal to looking like what you think of as food. So like you break a turkey down, right? And it's like feathers and its face and its beak and its feet and all of that. And it's like, man, that's an animal. Once you get that skin off it and the head off it and the feet off it, you're looking at what looks like a butterball from Thanksgiving. And you don't feel emotional about that anymore. You feel like that's food.
You feel hungry.
Yeah. It's really interesting, right? So eventually those things get reconnected in your mind the way they were meant to be connected. And, it'd be kind of similar to like if you and I were taking a walk through the forest, right? And I was just like irreverently bending over and ripping plants out, pulling them right up from the roots and just tossing them behind me, man. You'd be like, dude, knock that off. Why are you doing that? Like, why are you just randomly killing plants? But you go into the garden and you see people do that. And you're like, well, no, that's because that's our food. Right? But I would be bothered personally. It would emotionally bother me to watch you just pull up plants from the ground. I'd be like, man, that's a living thing. Stop it. Or if you were just ripping mushrooms off trees, but you weren't I'd just be like, stop it. But if you were harvesting them for food, I wouldn't feel that way. That would be normal to me. You know what I'm saying? And it's very similar. When you harvest animals for food, it's a very different thing. I understand why people are bothered by the idea of hunting for pure trophy. I can understand why that bothers people. There's a lot of nuance and complexity to that I don't think people have really worked through. And they should know about, because there are certain animals on the planet that without the hunting of them, those animals will probably go extinct soon. The rhino is an example of that. The elephant is an example of that. It is actually hunting, which is funding the remaining conservation of those animals. As shocking as that may be for people to hear, it's true, or at least in large part.
Because to get tags for those big game animals, it's so expensive that...
Yeah, well, in Africa is not set up the same way as it is here, right? Africa's a very different place. And what you'll have as an example will be, you'll have a big boar elephant, right? A big male elephant who is no longer really breeding and is becoming a threat either to people or to other elephants. And they'll decide they're going to take that one out of the population. Bull elephant. I don't know why I said boar elephant. Big bull elephant. Then they'll sell a tag for a hunter. He'll pay $30,000-$40,000 for that elephant. And that money then goes back into the conservation of the rest of those elephants. That's where you're left with like, oh, do I care more about the individual elephant or do I care more about elephants? It's interesting, right? And, yeah, well, that's the case. That's a lot of it is this way where you think it's really simple. How many things have you ever had a strong opinion on and then you find out it's way more nuanced than you realize and you feel kind of like a fool? Because you're like, oh man, I should have kept my mouth shut. I didn't realize how complex this is. We've been faced since 2016 with about 30 issues like that in our country. right? Where, you go like, oh, well, that's a strong polarizing thing. And I already know how I feel. And then you start to realize, oh, it's way more complicated. I should probably approach this a little bit more gently. So yeah, things are really not so simple, man. And one thing I want to say too, and I think people get confused about this with animals. A lot of people think like if you don't hunt that animal, it's just going to like live forever. It's like, man, they don't. I hate to tell you, a turkey's going to live about 3 years. A 4-year-old turkey is like a 110-year-old person, right? They are so heavily preyed upon by so many species that they have adaptations to that predation. Right? They are overproducing offspring as a resistance to the heavy predation. A 7-year-old deer would be like, wow, that's an old deer.
Right? Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, man. People are like, somebody shoots a buck in the last year of his life and people freak out. It's like, do you know what was going to happen that winter to that deer? When, like you said, the coyotes eat him alive or he starves to death on the landscape because he's incapable of getting enough food anymore. When he's in his decline, like, would you, it's like an interesting thing. Like, would you, if you had the choice, like you could be shot by a gun and die and then respectfully brought home and cared for, or you could be eaten alive, or you could freeze to death in starvation. Like, which would you choose? You know what I mean? It's an interesting concept. So yeah, animals just don't go on living forever because people don't hunt them. I mean, They have very finite lifespans and they live very challenging lives. And unless they are apex predators, they are dealing with predation on their landscape. Humans are just one small fraction of the overall predation landscape. We are predators, man. I mean, we have eyes in the front of our face for a reason. We are a predator species. In addition, what's so cool about us is we're like bears. We're omnivores. That's what's so cool. So like I said before, you get this thing of like, well, should we be right wing or left wing? Should we be conservative or should we be liberal? Should we be religious or should we be atheist? Should we be vegan or should we be carnivores? It's like, man, we're not vegans or carnivores. We're omnivores. I think the middle path applies in so many of these polarizing things. And the more you go to one side, the more you're going to get the other extreme. So like veganism took things really far one way. And now you have these paleo and carnivore diets popping up all over where you live. How many people now are on these carnivore diets where it's like, I just want to be like, really? A carnivore diet? I mean,
my brother's on it. He swears by it. He hasn't had a cold in like 3 years.
Yeah, right. He's on it for 3 years. Wow, that's so long. That's so long because humans have been omnivores for 3.5 million years. So his 3 years sure, you know what I mean? It's like, eventually, I'll just tell you right now, I hate to break this to you or to him because I like your brother a lot. But it's like, you're not going to be.
It's my other brother, Andy, not Cody, by the way. I don't know if you met Andy yet. Cool.
He will not be on the carnivore diet for very long. 10 years is not very long. I was a vegan for 10 years. That's not that long. I've lived 41 years. So it's overall, it's a lot less than half. So it's a short-term experiment, man. Nobody can sustain that. There's never been, even the Inuit people in the Arctic latitudes in the summer, what do you think they're doing? They're foraging plants. They're not living just up. There's no time in history where that's what people were doing. People think too, like, well, during the Ice Age, we were on a carnivore diet. It's like, oh, what were the herbivores that we were hunting, eating? Plants. What the fuck? I mean, seriously, people love these extremes. And so, like I said before, when this right wing versus left wing thing, I'm like, man, I'm taking the middle path because I agree with the liberals on a lot of stuff. I agree with the conservatives on a lot of stuff. I don't want to have to pick one. I have two brain hemispheres. Vegan or carnivore? Are you kidding me? We're omnivores. We're like bears. We really like meat when we can get it, and we really like plants. I like to eat salad. I also like to eat meat. And I'm not going to do this silly TikTok extreme thing anymore that I was so drawn into and so many of us were drawn into in the past, you know? And when you go out into nature, man, and you start to like you want to test your diet, go into nature, try it out there. Because vegans like have this idea that, well, I would just walk around out there and pick plants. It's like, well, why don't you try that? I invite you to come along and try that because you're going to find that it's not actually how you think it is. People have very cartoonish ideas about nature. They're not participating. So anybody living in the urban environment who doesn't have deep immersion into nature should probably not talk so much about what they think it's like out there until they go get some experience. I mean, it's like, I shouldn't probably talk too much about how to fix cars. I just don't have experience with it. So I'll let the mechanics handle that. Like I don't know. You know what I mean? It would be foolish. Like I don't spend my day in the garage working on cars. I do happen to go out into nature to get my food. So I think I can at least throw my opinion out there a little bit because I have some experience with it. And it's not what carnivore diet people think, and it's not what vegan people think. It's different. It's both.
Going back to the desensitization and the fact that we've become so, disconnected from nature and from our sources of food. And as I was describing, seeing that dead bear cub and seeing, Yogi the bear and my teddy bear and all of that, and just not being indoctrinated into those sort of visuals and that experience. I've thought about it from another angle too, in that when you kill an animal and you open an animal's insides and you see what's on the inside, I think many of us, including myself, the only time we've seen an organism's insides have been in horror movies. So I think the first time I ever saw a mammal cut open would have been like in the Friday the 13th movie that I still probably have nightmares about. So I think there's like a correlation between horror films and scary things and evil and demonic energies and the opening up of animals. Have you ever thought about that? That's like another way.
Have you ever watched a horror movie with the soundtrack off? You're like, oh, this isn't really scary. Media is like hypnosis. You've got audio and visual stimulation working together, right? If you remove it, it's interesting making my show because I get to see it with different music. So we'll have a scene where it's like, dun, 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 and then we'll change that music out for something more serious or more somber and more reverent. And it'll be like completely different scene, right? Media's played with these different aspects of our psychology. So you had blood and guts associated with fear. Now, the thing is when you watch children grow up around hunting, 2 years old, 3 years old, they have no problem putting their hands into an animal. They have no problem gutting an animal, cleaning an animal. This is not inherently hard for humans. It's inherently hard for humans who have been sheltered from it. But it's not hard for kids at all. If they've grown up around it, it's so normal to them. It's like every day. Now, that said, there's a science around cuteness. Okay, that's an interesting thing. It's neoteny. We've talked about neoteny before together. Big eyes, floppy ears, like pouty face, big lips, all these things that we associate with mammal babies is what we think of as cute, right? So if you look at the emojis that are meant to be cute or cartoons that are meant to be cute, you'll see that they exaggerate childlike features. And that evokes the sense of cuteness and compassion in us, as it should, man, because that's why we want to take care of babies, right? That's why if like you or me are walking down the street and we see a baby left alone, what are you, the first thing you're doing? What? Like if it was like actually abandoned, like scoop that thing up and care for it, man. You might even risk your life to do it, right? You might put yourself at risk to do it. I would do that for a bear cub too. I'm not cold to this. I see a bear cub in that situation you're talking about, man, that's going to be really hard for me because I would take care of that cub, right? And you'll see this too. Like I see a lot of imagery of indigenous people I see it a lot from South America where they've taken on some kind of pet, a monkey or, a parrot of some kind. Animals that they would eat and do eat, but for some reason will also keep and care for in certain circumstances. It's not mutually exclusive, man. It's not left or right. It's both can be true. I can care for baby bears. I care about bears, man. I personally think I care more about bears than people who sit in cities talking about how they care about bears. I interact with black bears. How many bears does the average person ever even encounter in their lifetime? They'd be lucky to see one cross the road. They're not involved in the, so anyway, I just think it's like, you're right. Horror movies media has shaped so many aspects of how we interact with the world. And media has been shaping this idea that vegetarians are more compassionate people and that meat eaters are horrible people. That's being shaped by media to this day. We have caricatures and stereotypes that have persisted through media.
It's interesting, the piece about the music, because I know so much of media, films, television, et cetera, is about programming you, right? To sell you something, or in some cases in training your brain just to be entertained and sort of distracted from the mundane life that you might live. And I was thinking as you were saying that, going back to your show and thinking like when you took those turkeys down, if Slayer had been the music for it, I would have been like, wow, this is not cool.
That's how so much hunting media is. Partially in making the show, man, because what you have is the people who've been making hunting media have been making it from a perspective. A lot of people will say, back to what we were talking about before, a lot of people will say, I don't agree with hunting. However, I do agree with native peoples taking it because I believe they were more reverent and compassionate and they used the animal respectfully, right? That's like a very common thing that you'll hear. I have found that if I present hunting in the way that I see it, which is for food, primarily first thing, it's for food. And second, it's done with respect, that most people go like, okay, I respect that. I get with that. But when you see it presented in the stereotypical way that it's been presented for so long, I mean, yeah, I find it off-putting when I see like heavy music being played where it's like this Red Bull, Mountain Dew, aggressive, like testosterone fueled, conquest, all about your ego. That's pretty off-putting to me. I mean, I don't like that. And that's not how I don't perceive it that way. It's why I get really turned off when people say to me, when they refer to hunting as a sport, I just really don't like that. This is not a sport for me. It'd be like if I said, oh, that sport you do, meditation, you'd be like, oh no, that's not a sport. Right. But like somebody could perceive it that way, or somebody's yoga practice that they're really diligent about as a personal tool for their evolution and spiritual growth, let's say. And I was like, oh man, you're in that yoga sport. Be like, dude, it's not a sport. It's a practice. I hunt and gather as a practice. This is my practice for re-engaging with the natural world and having a real... Look, we're at this time now where people are talking about leaving the planet and terraforming Mars, terraforming the moon. I think it's so important now to have a relationship with planet Earth. It's like the idea of destroying this planet and then just jumping to the next one. I know that's not happening next year or anything, but that's the conversation that's taking place, right? People like Elon Musk pushing that conversation forward. It's like, to me, it looks a lot like leaving a bad relationship because you're not willing to do the work. You got relationship problems. You're not willing to do the work. So you're jumping to the next one. We don't like, my question is this: what are you going to do on Mars? Are you going to bury the garbage in the ground again? Are you going to strip mine it like we did here? We're going to just then have to jump to the next. Now we're going to Venus. Because we can't fix our relationship with this planet. Now, a lot of people who don't have a relationship to this planet would benefit massively from developing a relationship with the earth. That's why, to me, hunting and foraging is not a sport. I don't hunt as a sport. I hunt as a practice to develop that relationship with the earth, because I see that as like the big missing piece right now for people. And we're heading towards transhumanism in a big way. We're heading towards virtual and augmented realities in a big way. We're talking about leaving our planet to colonize other places. And we have not worked on the relationship with this planet. And I just think I don't see how people are going to do that from the urban environment. That doesn't mean they can't live there, or, and I know this isn't for everybody. You brought up earlier the issue of scalability, right? I get this thing all the time. People will they'll try to illegitimize what I'm doing by saying not everybody can do it. And I'm kind of like, what can everyone do? Can everyone on planet play golf? How many golf courses would we need? Why are you not out at the golf course being like, you should stop playing golf. Not everyone can play golf. How many things are like that? Not everybody can have an electric guitar. It's just not realistic. No more electric guitars. It's like, well, not everyone can hunt, man. So it's not like, why are you out there? It's like, I'm just sharing what I'm doing. It's what I'm passionate about. And there's a lot of room for people to get on board. There's a lot of room. There's a lot of vacant seats here. So plenty of people can hop on board. I'm not going to saturate it. The management systems in place for hunting in North America are so solid. It's the greatest game management system that's ever been developed. It's called the North American model of game management. It's incredible. We have lots of room. And so, yes, not all 7 billion people can do it, but not all 7 billion people can do almost anything that we do, as far as activities or recreation or whatever it is. So I think that people put an undue burden on it. That's a way of illegitimizing it so they don't have to look at it. We'll be right back at you after this brief but important announcement. For
For the past 3 years, I've been really into red light therapy because I've learned through doing this podcast how important natural light is for your body and your health in general. There's a reason why Joovv is the #1 red light therapy brand in the world. Their devices are sleek, powerful, they're FDA cleared, and they come in a bunch of different sizes, so you can set them up just about anywhere. I've got one here in my studio that I use when I'm on a break. I have the full Elite unit in front of a Vibe plate, next to my sauna, up in the Zen Den in the backyard. And I even have the little Joovv Go travel model that I use to regulate my sleep and things like that when I'm on the road. It's actually the single easiest health intervention I do and has some of the biggest results. Now, newer research is also showing red light therapy is great for improving women's hormone health, like thyroid regulation. It's done great things for my testosterone, but it's also really good for women, which is cool. Now, how does one therapy have all of these benefits? It's super simple. Our cells actually crave natural light to do their job. And when you give your body the light it needs, everything just works better. So if you're trying to improve your skin, hormones, reduce pain, get better sleep, red light therapy with the Joovv is a great long-term investment. To check these out for yourself, super easy. Head over to joovv.com/Luke. That's JOOVV.com/Luke. Using that link, you're going to get a special bonus from the Joovv team. They're giving away to all my listeners. And there you can find all the research and dig into the data yourself and see that this is so legit. I also like it because it's a therapy you can do while you're doing different things. So I'll lift weights, I'll stretch, I'll shake around on the Vibe plate, I'll listen to music. I do all kinds of weird stuff standing in front of my Joovv. So it's great. Get to joovv.com/Luke. And now back to the interview. In terms of the health profile and the nutrient density of wild foods, I'm curious as to what your subjective experience has been now that, depending on the season and resources that you have available, it seems like a lot of your diet for the past few years has been coming from your landscape. Have you noticed subjectively any changes in your health, issues that have been resolved, feeling more energy, more resilient? What's the difference between, the best organically raised produce and pasture-raised animals that you'd get from, a nice supermarket like Whole Foods or wherever versus the nutrition of the animals and plants that you're getting from the land?
Yeah. We'll break it down into a couple different pieces here. When it comes to plants, there's really no question. The science is very established. Wild plants are far richer in nutrients than their domesticated counterparts, almost always. Particularly, I just put out a podcast yesterday with the forager chef Alan Burgo. Really cool dude. One thing he kept talking about, he talks about wild plants are real plants doing real plant things. And he gets real burned about the idea of like microgreens, like they put on stuff in the restaurant,
Yeah, I listened to that one. Yeah.
He gets so mad about that. But this idea of real plants doing real plant things, what does that mean? It means like your dog is weaker than the wolf that it comes from, because the wolf deals with hot and cold. The wolf deals with extreme conditions. The wolf deals with the actual environment. The wolf has to be smart and alert. No one is putting a bowl of food in front of the wolf each day. The wolf is stronger than the dog. You might have a real strong dog, or you might have a real weak dog, right? So you might have a dog that's much closer to the wolf, and that dog is strong, but not as strong as the wolf. And you might have a really weak dog, like a little lap dog that kind of is super, super needy, right? It's like this with...
Yeah, I got one right here.
Well, I'm sure it fills its role well, full respect. But similarly, the wild plant's going to be the strongest because it's a real plant doing real plant things. Again, I'm stealing that from my friend Alan. It's living outside under extreme UV. It's dealing with wind blowing it around. No one's putting a fence around it. No one's fertilizing it. No one's watering it. No one's taking care of it. So it becomes vigorous and strong. In the process of doing that, it has to create all of these phytochemicals that protect it from herbivorous insect predation, macro herbivores too, large organisms, mammals and such, birds. It has to produce chemicals that protect it against sunlight so that it doesn't get scorched. And those chemicals tend to be medicinal to us, or they tend to be antioxidant to us. And you get much more of them than the plant that's been grown. Now, also, some of the plants we grow are much closer to the wild plant and some are really weak, right? So here's a cool example. Asparagus is like an almost wild plant. Now you see wild asparagus, it just looks like the asparagus in the store. Now you'll note that asparagus is a plant that's hard to find all year in your store. For that very reason, seasonal. But you can also get that asparagus, they grow under a dark covering, and it's like, have you ever seen it? It's like an albino asparagus. It's all white. Okay, that would be like the lapdog version of asparagus. Very weak versus, of course, I want the asparagus with more chlorophyll. Obviously, that would be like more like the dog that's close to the wolf, like the German Shepherd or whatever, the Alaskan Malamute, let's say. So some plants are in their cultivated form are still super nutritious, right? There's a lot of fantastic. I've been this big fan of chia seeds forever. Chia seeds are so similar to a wild food in their nutrition profile. They're like really strong and vigorous still, even though we cultivate them. But some of the things we grow have gotten pretty weak. So that's something to consider. But wild plants always top the list for antioxidant value, for nutrient value, across the board, fiber, all of that. Also, sugar to fiber ratio is usually much better in the wild food than it is in the cultivated food. Now, when it comes to animals, things are
Daniel, before you move on to animals, what are some of the weak sauce, hybridized, not medicine-filled veggies?
Apples are the worst, man. I just filmed a whole episode. Most of my shows have hunting and foraging kind of combined in the episode. I just did for season 2 a whole episode on apples. I got some friends in New York, Red Kill Mountain. Check them out on Instagram, on the web. Red Kill Mountain. Kill is a Dutch word, I guess, for creek or brook. So it refers to the area they're in. All the brooks are called kills. So this guy, basically what he did was he was looking for an investment property. It's quite a long story. He ends up kind of stuck with this property and realizes he's got a couple thousand wild apple trees. Now, apples are really unique because if you picture you go to the store, like name an apple variety you might buy at your supermarket. Like pick one. Take your Granny Smith and you cut it like hemispherically like this, right? So you cut it sagittally or transverse, you flip it open and you got those like 5 little compartments, and typically you're going to have 5 seeds in there, right? Every one of those seeds will produce a different apple. None of them will be a Granny Smith. Probably none will even resemble a Granny Smith. It will immediately return to like wild genetics. Picture you got a tree with Granny Smiths on it, right? So you've got, let's say conservatively, you've got 300 apples on the tree. Okay? You've got 300 apples. Let's make it simpler. You got 100 apples and you got 5 seeds in each apple. Now, sometimes you're going to have as many as 10 seeds in an apple. Sometimes you get a couple seeds per compartment. But let's say, just generally, you got 5 seeds in the apple and you got 100 apples, right? So now you've got like 500 apple seeds. Everyone's going to produce a different apple tree. You're going to end up with 500 unique apple cultivars. None of them will be predictable. Some will be bitter, some will be sweet, some will be tannic, some will be russeted, some will be red, some will be purple, some will be pink fleshed, some will be green, some will be yellow, all different, okay? You can't predict it, which means you can't plant orchards from seed. Because if you do, you don't know you'll get apples that people will want to eat. So how do we produce apples then? We clone them. We take Granny Smith cuttings. At one point, one of these seeds produced a wild Granny Smith apple. A pippin, that's an apple tree grown from seed. One produced a Granny Smith and somebody said, this is awesome, I'm going to clone this. So they made cuttings and they grafted it. And then over time, what you end up with is that you end up with a supermarket full of all of these cloned apples. They all tend to be high sugar, right? They all tend to be oversized. They all tend to be really robust in the shipping process, but you lose so much fiber, you lose so much flavor, you lose so much diversity. It's like that whole thing, celebrate diversity. We're not doing that with apples. And if the average person was invited to eat cloned animal food, they would probably not want it. You'll have some contrarians who be like, I don't care, don't mean anything. But most people are going to be like, yeah, I'm not really digging the cloned, fish. I'm not really digging the cloned cow or the cloned sheep. But people are eating cloned apples every day. And that's true of a lot of foods. I just want to give you that example of how kind of far off track we've gotten and how little we know. Johnny Appleseed, right? This dude what he was doing when people were headed westward, they were being given land by the federal government, right, to homestead. But in order to do it, in order to receive that land, they had to plant a certain number of fruit trees. So Johnny Appleseed was an entrepreneur selling people pippins. He believed for religious reasons that it was wrong to clone apple trees. And so he would plant apples from seed, hence his name Johnny Appleseed, and he was giving people pippins. and they were taking them out west and planting them on their land holdings. So very fascinating story about a guy who was obsessed with the wild version of the fruit. So there's an example. And that whole thing, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Joe Robinson in the book, Eating on the Wild Side, kind of reveals that actually studies done on an apple a day shows that your health declines if you eat a store-bought apple a day, particularly a red or a yellow delicious because their sugar content. So it's just not true. But wild apples, I was just in a savanna of 2,000 wild apple trees, and every apple tree that you select from has a different apple. So you're walking from tree to tree, tasting radically different fruits. It's incredible. It's an incredible experience. None the same. So pretty special stuff. There are plants like I mentioned before, asparagus. That is a very close to wild plant. Blueberry, very close. Not as good as the wild, but pretty close. What are some other examples? There's quite a few. Brazil nuts are like a wild plant. Sea vegetables that they're growing, now in aquaculture, still very close, grown in seawater. They're fantastic. So there's like a lot of stuff that you could pick from that's still really good. But there's some stuff that's gotten so far away from what it actually started off as. It's quite shocking. As far away from what it started off as chihuahuas are far away from wolves. I think when you get to fish is one of the examples where just the wild thing is better than the farmed thing. Aquaculture for fish is like still in a pretty sloppy place, and the quality of the food being turned out is it's not as good as the wild food. It's typically being fed things that increase its omega-6 fat content and decrease its omega-3 fat content. They tend to be subjected to a lot more pharmaceuticals and environmental pollutants, and they're living in close proximity. One of the problems is like when you stack and pack any kind of organism into a monoculture, it gets sick. That's true of corn. It's true of cows. It's true of chickens. It's true of people. That's why our cities, people are so sick in them because they're monocultures of people. So, I think with fish, it's a great example. When you get to like mammals, this is where you get it's a little less compelling because your wild animal is going to have a lot higher omega-3 to omega-6, but people who raise cattle right on grass, they produce some pretty awesome meat. Like if you're hearing me and going like, man, that whole hunting thing's cool, but I'm not going to do it. It's like, man, you get a connection to a good organic or sort of, biodiverse farm, a polyculture farm that raises meat. You get some really good stuff, but you'll never have the story. You'll never sit down to that meal and know. You'll never have the story. You'll never really know. And there's something about that. It's like we sit down to eat a meal here and I turn around and it's like, hey, there's the skull of this animal we're eating. And here's the story of it. And every time I eat that, it's like a celebration of that animal's life. That to me is something that that's not a nutrient per se, but it's something that you can't replace. It's really powerful. And it's something you can only know when you do it. And when you share that with somebody too, when you share that food with somebody, it's like kind of, it's really cool to have somebody over and you cook them a nice grass-fed tenderloin, but it's not the same as when you cook them, a piece of a piece of venison backstrap and you tell them the story of that animal and you share that. That's a different thing altogether, Well,
that's what I got watching your show. I was like, God, that food. And I'm not a big foodie. It's more of a utilitarian, necessary part of life. I just want to do my thing. Food's more just something I have to do to stay alive, but I don't typically get into it. But there are times when I see food prepared in the way that you guys are like the story behind it. And then you're seeing like this amazing culinary creativity. I'm like, God, why is Maine so far? Like, I want to hang out with you and your friends, dude.
Oh, dude. See, that's one of the things.
So
I'm trying to do
like,
more stuff in more places. Like one of the goals in season 2, we travel a bit more. I got to do a whole episode up in Newfoundland. I just got back from, I did a really fun episode with Alan Burgo. I was talking about a minute ago where I was harvesting pigeons off this organic corn farm. I mean, the story, I don't have time. Obviously, we're deep in. I wish I could just talk for the next half hour about pigeons and how amazing pigeons are. The original poultry. They were the first domesticated bird. This was the original like chicken for people. The story of pigeons and the role that they played as the first internet, the first mail service, in addition to being food. I mean, it's just incredible. Pigeons are one of the most delightful foods you could imagine. Like if I could cook you some pigeons, man, you would be just over the moon. It's so good.
Really?
Yeah, it really is. But anyway, so we shot that one in Wisconsin. We're just getting ready to go down to Georgia. I want to do more episodes in more places because really I could do a whole season of shows right based out of your house, man. That's what I want people to realize is we could probably take us an hour to drive out of your house and we could be filming whole episodes out there on what we can hunt, fish, and forage right in your landscape. And this isn't about like Maine. It's about everywhere. There's already systems in place that you maybe don't know how to tap into them yet, right? So part of what I'm doing, like I've just launched a program, and part of that program is to show people how to start getting involved where they are, how to tap into the hunting, the fishing, and the foraging in your area, because it's not about Maine. It's not about any particular place, it's about every place. And what I want, just like I was saying before, like I get confused by racism because I'm like, man, aren't all races like equally awesome? And shouldn't they all be celebrated for their like really cool, diverse ways they have adapted to the places that they are land races from? Like, it's all so cool to me. Similarly, it's like, I want to celebrate the diversity of hunting, fishing, and foraging in all these different places because they're all cool. I started off with season 1 doing a lot of the stuff that is local to me, but man, everywhere you go, there's really, really cool stuff you can get involved.
That's encouraging because I'm not trained in your wild ways. When I go out into the natural landscape here in Southern California, for example, I don't see anything at all that I could eat. I know it's there. The only thing I ever see is what I believe to be fennel. Yeah, it smells like licorice. I think it's fennel. I've eaten it and I haven't gotten sick, so I think that's probably what it is. But I know there's so much more there. One thing I'm curious about too is, I could just dive into this shit forever because it's so fascinating. But so when you have wild fish and farmed fish, I think a lot of us are now aware to some degree that there's risk of contamination, right? PCBs, mercury on the wild fish side, the larger fish that are living longer and bioaccumulating toxins. And then, next thing you know, you've got high mercury, et cetera. And then with the farmed fish, feeding them GMO corn, soy, God knows what they're feeding them, dyes and things to make them turn pink. When you're dealing, and then of course in the industrial food supply of animal foods, obviously antibiotics, all kinds of nasties going on there. In wild game, whether it be those pigeons or the iguanas you're getting off the side of the freeway, those invasive species that you're hunting in Florida, or even just deer off your landscape, how much risk is there for if those deer were grazing on a glyphosate-rich farm, or those pigeons were eating garbage with pharmaceuticals in it? And, how much contamination is there in those organs and the meat? And if so, is there a way to test for it? Or how do you know that those wild meats aren't tainted in some way? I'm picturing your iguanas in Florida, like eating, rotten Twinkies out of somebody's garbage on the side of their house. And now they're bioaccumulating all the weird shit they're eating. And now you're eating them, So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, iguanas, first, I'll just say, are vegetarians, so they don't bioaccumulate all that much, and I take them usually fairly young. But I have a real interest in going down to the Everglades to hunt invasive pythons. They are notoriously high in PCBs, right? So that's like a kind of thing where it's like, I'm going to have one meal one time. I'm not eating that as a habit.
Oh, where are they picking that up from?
Because they're apex predators. And so apex predators over the course of their lifetime are bioaccumulating just what's going on with fish. Like, for instance, I fish for mackerel, a small oily fish. This is one of the healthiest wild fish you can eat. I also like to eat striped bass, but striped bass eat those fish. And every mackerel has that tiny little bit, but after a while, if they keep eating, as the bigger fish eat those fish, they bioaccumulate. That's what happens up the food chain, right? So this is an issue. It's one of the reasons why I'm presenting in this season of the show. A lot of hunters are going to laugh at my hunting. I'm not getting the big 12-point bucks. I'm not after the, 1,200-pound moose. I care less about that because those are older animals, right? You with me on this? Nobody I know goes to the farm and they say, I'm looking for like a 7-year-old cow. That's what I would like to eat. Like a 7-year-old bull. Everybody's eating a 1 to 2-year-old animal. They're eating chickens that aren't even a year old, right? Most people don't realize they're eating babies all the time. That's what we prefer. But then hunters are, because there's this ego thing involved, a lot of times they're after these big trophy animals. I'm like really, that occasionally I'll end up with those animals, but that's not what I'm really that interested in. So so that's an issue. Just like with our modern food supply, you have to navigate that. And it's true of plants too. So, one of the reasons that we don't harvest the bulbs off wild leeks where I live is because the river system that we're harvesting off of is still carrying a lot of contaminants from paper mills in the past. And so we don't take the underground portion of the plant. We just take the top portion. It's less, it doesn't have the contaminants. They don't make it up because of gravity. They literally don't make it up in the top of the plant. So everything in our environment's polluted, whether we're getting it from farms or we're getting it from, wild animals or whatever it is, right? It's like the challenge that it's like welcome to Earth. But yes, if you're very concerned about that, you can navigate what you hunt and how you hunt. So in episode 7 of WildFed season 1, I harvest this little button buck, like a 1-year-old deer. And I remember when I went, it's not in the show, but I went to tag that deer. You got to, if this is a whole controlled system, it's not like you're just out there Elmer fudding around, shooting whatever you want, right? I got to bring this animal to the tagging station, have it legally tagged. And I get there and they're laughing at me. Like, pretty small deer, ain't it? Like, it's like a giant ego contest, right? And I'm just laughing like, you know how good this thing's going to eat? Are you kidding me? Like, again, like you wouldn't go to the farm and be like, yeah, I'll take that 5-year-old rooster off your hands. That's going to make good eating. You're like, I want that little soft one. And so for some reason, when people hunt, they approach it a little bit differently. But yeah, there's a lot of animals you could eat that be very healthy. And there's animals you need to understand the different, pollution issues with. Same as it is when you go into the supermarket, man. And as you know, you could go into a really great health food store. You go into Erewhon, right? Like a lot of really good stuff there. And there's certain things in there that you're like, I'm not touching that, but I will choose that. And so it's no different. This is the earth we live on. It's the same. So you might choose to fish for certain species and not other species. Now, there's a lot of stuff that people don't realize. Like, for instance, that the selenium levels in fish that live in the ocean, that selenium buffers mercury. Like, that is, like, how many people are you hearing about with mercury toxicity from eating fish? It's not like a thing that actually is happening. It's like a theoretical thing. Very little mercury poisoning going on in people from seafood consumption. I'm not saying that can't happen, but it's not like this epidemic we're dealing with. And we know people are eating huge amounts of seafood. That said, I'm not going to fish in the cooling pond at Fukushima.
Right.
Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so that's another component. Like, do I want to shoot deer, at the Monsanto cornfield? No, not really, So you got to kind of like pick and choose where you do things, but it's no different than going to the supermarket now or even going to the farmer's market. I go down to the farmer's market here, and there's organic farms where that produce, you're just looking at it, you're like, no way, dude. How is it that big? You say organic, but like that food, like I asked the farmer that I buy from, I go, why is that farm over there got such a gigantic, beautiful looking produce? No offense, but like compared to what you're growing here. She's like, well, that's all nitrogen. It's just plumped up with water. It's watered down flavor too. Like my food isn't as big and not as plump looking, but the flavor is like she's like, older folks come here, buy my stuff and go, this tastes like what food used to taste like when I was a kid, because the flavors are concentrated. You can blow that thing up bigger. You get more for it. They're using whatever organic nitrogen fertilizers. Things get bigger, but they're not necessarily better, right? So it's like, even in the organic farmer's market, you got to kind of pick and choose what you buy. And it's like when you go to Whole Foods and it's like everything in there, such a small fraction of the food in there now is organic. People just think like it's all good. It's at Whole Foods, it's all good, right? And it's like, man, you could be buying the Monsanto whatever there too. So you always have to navigate this. So this is not a unique issue in wild foods. It's just an issue in food.
So you sort of look at the, as best you can, the traceability of like the landscape that animal has been living on, and then the supply chain of the foods that they've been eating, and do your best to discern.
Yeah. Or certain things where it's like, I know that mackerel is a really healthy fish to eat. I know that if I want to eat a wild swordfish, I might want to be more sparing in how often I do that. Like I said before, I like to eat striped bass a couple times a year. I like to fish for them. I think they're a beautiful animal. They migrate up the coast, and the problem is they're born and they breed down where PCBs were invented. So they pick up a lot of that. I'll only eat a couple of them, and I'll try to eat the smallest ones that I can legally keep. So if I get the real gigantic one, that's probably not the good food one, right? But that's the same as, like I said, you also don't want to eat the old bull on the farm either. The old breeding bull.
Yeah.
It's the same. So like if you wanted to take a picture with an animal to be like, look how cool this is, you probably want that picture with that giant bull, not with the young calf. But if it's going to come down to what you're going to eat, you probably want to eat the young calf. And so hunting's been riddled with this ego pride stuff that I'm not really tied up in that. So I don't care as much. So yeah, I'm typically eating younger animals, and then I'm aware of, and this is the same with plants, man. It's the same with mushrooms. Wild mushrooms are notorious for uptaking things like heavy metals from the environment. So it matters where you harvest them from. And The thing is you go to the nice high-end restaurant that's got foraged mushrooms and you don't know. Where were they? You put an economic value, you start paying foragers to get stuff, they're willing to get them wherever they can get them, right? So when you go out and get them yourself, right? So it's like that,
In terms of the sustainability and the management of resources when it comes to sea life and wild game, I think that a lot of people perhaps might be unaware that many of the people that make a living, such as like commercial fishermen, for example, have much more of a vested interest in protecting the environment than perhaps even some environmental activists, right? I'm thinking to a part in your show where I found this, I don't know why I was surprised by this, but I was like, oh shit, these guys take it very seriously, where there was one point you guys were out catching lobster and you got a lobster full of a bunch of eggs, a mama lobster. And it was like, oh, no, we don't keep that. And then they put a little notch in her tail to indicate to the next person that traps her that she's fertile and she's going to help produce. And everyone had this kind of reverence.
You're going to lose your license if you keep that one. You're going to lose your license. Like the lobster industry in Maine is known for self-regulation. It's quite an effective model as they're starting to include fishermen in the conversation. I'm looking to interview this woman right now who's lost all her scientific funding because she believes that the Atlantic bluefin population is stronger than there's a party line right now that bluefin tuna in the Atlantic are in peril. But the fishermen are going like, I don't think so. We're the ones who see them every day.
Right.
Like there's quite a lot of these around, right? She's been defunded. She's now working out of her garage.
Oh, wow.
Because her research is saying, hey, we're actually, maybe they're a lot healthier than we realize. Stocks are okay. No, the environmental policy right now is we're trying to shut this industry down. So you got this challenge because you've got environmentalists on one end. You're like Sea Shepherd type folks. They're going to drive out, stop your boat with their like little jet skis. And then you have like regulators who are just trying to do the science on this. But the problem is those folks aren't fishermen. They're not seeing these animals in the way that the people who fish for them commercially are. You need all the voices at the table. That said, lots of animals have been massively depleted. Now, here's what's interesting. People will be like, these animals are depleted because of hunting. These animals are depleted because of fishing. It's like, well, there's nuance here. Let's parse that. Here's how that works. Market hunting is now illegal for mammals. There's a couple rare exceptions in a couple places where there's exceptions.
What's that? Where you're commercially going to sell
market
the
hunting
game?
is where you used to harvest the game and then sell it to the people who don't hunt. This happened with the passenger pigeon, and we actually caused its extinction. Most people in America do not know the history about passenger pigeons. Man, passenger pigeons were so dense. They would fly overhead of your city and it would darken the sky for 3 days as a river of pigeons flew overhead, blotting out the sun for days. People would be shooting cannons of shot and broken seashells into the air. And just this animal was unbelievable. We caused its extinction. It's a truly, truly sad story. But it wasn't people who were hunting for their own subsistence. It was people who were hunting to sell it to people who aren't getting their own food. Okay, now here's the thing. In most cases, what's causing the depletion of fish stocks is not people like me who go out and catch a fish to bring home and eat. It's the demand of the people who don't fish who want to eat those fish. Does that make sense? It's the people who are saying that this is wrong, but eating that fish. It's all the hipsters at the sushi place who have this massive demand for parts of these fish, but are not involved in the fishery because hunting for fish is still a legal thing. Whereas it's illegal, like you can't do that with deer. I can't even barter deer. So if you came over and you said, hey man, I harvested these shrimp and I noticed that you got a deer this year. Do you want to trade? That's illegal. I can give you, yeah, of course. Think about it. Because that means I have to put a monetary value. Well, this much shrimp is worth this much. Now we're starting to do a financial transaction. That's against the law. I can gift you a piece. You can gift me some of what you have. But we can't be doing that on some kind of economic level because that'll lead to poaching. As soon as you start to put a value on it, it leads to poaching. You with me? So what's going on is not everybody can go out and hunt everything. Some animals, like for instance in Maine, we have our moose. They're our iconic mammal here. I can't just go out and hunt a moose every year. And when I get my hunting license, I can't get a moose tag. I have to put into a lottery system, and a certain number of moose tags, about 2,000, are given out every year so that we don't overharvest them. If twice as many people want to hunt next year, they're going to have to give out half as many tags. That makes sense? Like you can't, or they're going to give out the same number of tags, I should say. They can't sell more of those tags because it will affect the moose population. Some animals are abundant enough that everybody can get involved over the counter. Some animals, people they spend their whole life trying to get a tag and never do. So this is very well regulated, right? So hunting is very well regulated. Fisheries in the ocean, now I'm doing a lot of podcast episodes with people in the fisheries to try to figure this thing out. It's a little more complicated because there's huge demand, not just in the United States, but most of our seafood is exported actually to other countries that have huge seafood intakes. But the problem again is not people fishing for their own food or for feeding their families or feeding their friends. It's people who are fishing with massive trawlers, draggers, and are pulling up huge amounts of these fish and then having all this bycatch that they kill off or dump back in the sea dead, and then they sell that into markets. That's really the problem. And, ultimately, I think we'll see that go away the way we did see that with, the market hunting for bison. Look what it did, right? I mean, nearly extincted the species. So people will blame that on hunters. And I'm like, man, it's not the hunters, it's you guys who are buying it. It's really interesting how all that works. Unfortunately, where we're at right now is there's extremely little regulation on plants. So I don't have to worry as much when I hunt. I don't have to self-regulate as much because I'm legally regulated. Like there's already decisions are already made. And, I have several people on my show. I just interviewed the bear biologist from Maine at the last week of his career, 37 years. He's the one who helped set the policy for how many bears we can harvest. Or I got to interview the migratory bird specialist and upland game bird specialist. He decides how many turkeys we can hunt. Right? That's already decided. Nobody's saying, well, this is how many leeks you can take. This is how many fiddleheads you can take. This is how many, whatever that plant is. There's a little bit of regulation around wild rice in the Great Lakes region, but otherwise plants are unregulated and they're the property of the landowner. So think about this. The way it works in the United States is if a wild animal is on your property, that is not your animal. It is like that in England. It's not like that here. The animals are owned in trust by the people. You own all of the deer in California as much as every other resident of California. You guys own in trust those animals. Now you can control access. So if the animal's on your property, you can be like, well, nobody's allowed on my property. And as long as that animal's on your property, nobody can really get access to it because it'd be trespassing on your property. But as soon as that animal crosses off your property, it's up to anybody who's got a hunting license in the right season to be able to harvest that animal because you guys share ownership technically, legally of the animal. But you are technically, legally, as a landowner, you own the rooted plants on your property. So I can't come on your property and forage legally without your permission, right? So it's just this completely unregulated thing. As a landowner, you can rip up the plants if you want to. It's up to you. Now it's getting very confusing. We have a lot of battles here in court right now going on about seaweeds because seaweeds aren't plants. So we don't know who owns the seaweeds. We don't know if they're owned in trust by the people. We don't know if who owns the intertidal zone. Does the person who owns up to the shore own the intertidal zone when those seaweeds are? We have Canadian companies down here harvesting huge amounts of our seaweed habitat, taking up bladderwrack, using it for fertilizer and selling it. We don't know, are they stealing from the people of Maine? We're not sure yet. There's a lot of legal battles going on. So we need more regulation. Unfortunately, I hate to say more regulation, but we do need to have something in place for plants and for algae. But we have a really good system in place for animals. So if you want to get involved in hunting, the thing is your money that you spend on your hunting license is going to be used for conservation. That's what that money goes to. It goes to fund the research being done by the biologists. It goes to fund the wardens who protect that game. Interestingly, when you buy hunting equipment or even firearms that are not for hunting and ammunition that's not, if you go buy an AR-15 or a Glock handgun, here's what's interesting. There's an built-in 11% tax on that firearm that goes to the federal government, and the federal government allots that money to the states to fund wildlife research and habitat. I got to recently go down and interview somebody from the Federal Fish and Game and talk about this, the Pittman-Robertson Act, which has been around since the 40s. Think about this, there's a big push against the Second Amendment. If we ban guns, we're going to have to figure out where that 11% is going to come from. Because that's how we fund, right? A lot of people who want to see animals on the landscape do not understand that they are actually fighting against something that's funding it. So that's really interesting. And that's also true of fishing rods and archery equipment. So this is really well established, but we do need more on the plant side and more on the algae side, more on the mushroom side, because that doesn't exist yet.
Do you think there's more poaching and illegal activity and greed, corruption on the open sea than there is on the land, because there's the veil of open space that it's harder to catch people and harder to regulate.
It's international waters, right? We now control out to 200 miles. So the federal government, the states control out to, at least here, they control out to 3 miles. Or maybe it's 2 to 3 miles. Don't quote me on that. Somewhere between 2 and 3 miles. And then from that line out to 200 miles is our exclusive economic zone. So back in the day, what was happening is a Chinese or a Russian trawler, Japanese trawler could come into our inshore waters and fish it out and then leave, sell that fish on and off into another marketplace or bring it home, right? Now we control, our Coast Guard controls out to the 200-mile line. Outside of that is open international waters. And so I wouldn't say it's like poaching is the big problem. And poaching is not a huge problem now in the United States. I mean, we have a pretty good system in place. For sure, there's people who poach, but we have good law enforcement for that. We have good regulation, and we have a good culture in the hunting world that we frown upon that. Like most hunters are not supportive of poaching, right? Most of us are very against that. We participate fairly in the system. What the big problem is the big seafood markets, like I was talking about before. It's sushi, man. It's fish consumption in other countries. And what it is nations going into other nations' waters and fishing it out in ways that they wouldn't want to do at home, or that they already did at home and there's not enough fish left, and then bringing that back to markets. And so, the seas, because we don't have global governance, we have, sovereign nation governance, it's pretty awkward what happens in the spaces in between. We don't have a good system for that.
Wow, that might be the only argument for global government that I've ever heard.
What we need is like international coalitions that really agree on how to manage this stuff. We have that, we have that with whales now. There's a couple of countries.
Oh, we do?
Yeah, there's a couple of countries that are not on board: Norway, Iceland, Japan, that still have limited, very sustainable whale hunts. I'm all for sustainable whale hunts. I believe if you can sustainably harvest off a population, not compensatory mortality. In other words, what you're killing does not affect the population. The population can continue to grow and fill out. I don't have a problem with that. And they're doing that in some places with minke whales and a few other whales. Interestingly, I interviewed a guy recently who, a journalist, I can't wait to release this audio, man. I can't wait for you to hear it. This guy went and lived for a year with a tribe of people in Indonesia who they're hunter-gatherers, but unlike most hunter-gatherers need huge amounts of space in order to get all their food. But these folks don't, because they live in a little coastal village in one of the richest pieces of ocean in the world. They live by hunting whales, dolphins, and giant rays with harpoons. They basically have like a dive board off the front of their little boats, and they run and dive off, and they eat about 20 sperm whales a year in their village. Sperm whales, like the big whales, right? And they do it very sustainably. I mean, this can be done sustainably. But outside of that, and there's some indigenous whale hunts, and like I said, you have a couple nations. All the other nations have gotten together. I mean, again, I could do 3 hours on whales. There's a lot there. Most people don't understand that the only reason civilization is here today in the form that it's in is because of whale oil. Whale oil, before petroleum, was whale oil. Whale oil lubricated all the machines of the Industrial Revolution and lit all the city streets around the world. It was whale oil. People were going, and it all came right out of Massachusetts primarily is where this happened from. But what went on in the whaling era is the number of whales harvested is shocking and was truly unsustainable. Whales are finally recovering, but most nations have gotten together and regulated that. And we need that with more of the fisheries.
Right. That absolutely makes sense. I think I do have that thought when I'm not a huge sushi eater, but other people are, and I go along at times. But I think about that, like, man, think of every city in the United States, how many fucking sushi restaurants there are, that are just crushing fish.
Man, eel is a crazy. What's going on with eel? Again, I could just go on and on about eels, man. It's like all those eels are coming out of Maine, right where I live. They're harvesting the baby eels are born out near the Caribbean as little larvae. They float up to the coast here in what they're called glass eels, and they start to migrate up into the river systems and out into the brooks and everything. Well, people are catching them, selling them off to the Chinese market. They raise them in captivity in China. And then that's what's that unagi that you eat in sushi places. And we are stripping, by taking them out of Maine, they eventually move down the coast and fill in all along the Atlantic seaboard. Well, now that's not happening and eels are becoming very threatened, but there's not really good regulation because sushi market, man, it's got a demand. So a lot of people, this is what we were talking about before. If people saw what they were participating in, they wouldn't, but they don't see it. And all of us get hungry and we got to eat, and it's hard because there's a lot of choices that are really tough to make. And I think seafood's the most confusing. So I will say this little promise here. One of the things I'm doing on the podcast is I want to figure this out because I'm confused about what seafood's okay to eat and what isn't. I'm confused about that. So I'm interviewing a lot of people about it, trying to get to the bottom, because I think people are just, they don't know what to do. And when you don't know what to do, you tend to just do whatever. If you live near the coast like I do, I go out, like I have a boat, a 20-foot Lund Alaskan. It's an aluminum boat, 115 horse motor, small boat, right? I can do inshore stuff. I can't go offshore. I'm not taking that boat 30 miles offshore. And the cost of maintaining a boat for that is very, very high. That's an expensive thing to do. But I take a trip every year, sometimes twice, 3 times, out of Ogunquit, Maine. It's what's called a head boat. So I pay like $200 for the day, about $125, and then there's some associated fees because they cut my fish, and I got to pay for parking and all that. It cost me maybe $125, $130. I go offshore for the day. We go out 30 miles and we fish on the bottom, 300-400 feet down. We used to fish cod. Now that fishery's closed for regulation reasons, but we fish pollock and haddock. And I bring home enough fish from one of those trips to eat fish once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week for the rest of the year. So I spend a couple $100. I go out and I bring home, they cut all that fish right on the boat. I come home with fillets, I vacuum seal them. So I know that not everyone can do this, right? Like we were talking about before, but if you live on the coast, you can just take like a day trip. You don't need equipment. They have all the equipment. You don't need to know what to do. They show you what to do. You don't need to know how to fillet fish. They fillet the fish for you. You got to pay a tip. I paid $20 or something to the guy. I come home with that fish. All you got to do is put it in your freezer, right? And then you don't have to think about it anymore. It's like you got your fish for the year, So there's opportunities like that for people just like yourself who are like, oh, I don't really know how to do any of this, but it's kind of neat. We go out for the day. I see whales, man. I see dolphins. I see giant sunfish and basking sharks and watch the birds. And it's just an incredible experience. And I get enough fish for the year. So there's a lot of cool opportunities like that. And then what's nice about that is you're no longer having to participate in the fish market thing. You're kind of off the hook. So you could do that probably right off where you live, man, right out of LA. I bet there's all kinds of head boats you could take. I'm sure there's got to be.
That's wild, dude. Wow. So much great information here. I want to ask you as we start to wrap this up, and it's funny because you're one of the few guys who puts out content and owns a company that doesn't really do much promoting of your company. Like in your podcast, you'd be like, yeah, this show is brought to you by Surthrival. Next, and it's just kind of like an afterthought. But I'm very discerning about the brands that I promote and represent, and just that I take personally. And I'm pretty good at figuring out who's doing things right. And you guys have for, as you said, 12 years or something now, just made a really solid product line. And you could have, made 400 products and diluted the whole supply chain and made a bunch of bullshit, frankly. But you've kind of just stuck to what you do and you do well. And just for your benefit and the benefit of the listeners, give people like a little spiel on like some of the cool things that you guys make at Surthrival. The ones that I've used the most over the years, I just had some this morning actually, I shit you not, is the pine pollen extract. I always recommend that, especially to men, especially men that are aging. And maybe you can explain why it's so effective at sometimes waking you up with a pup tent for a bed, and also the colostrum. Yeah. Only Boy Scouts will know what a pup tent is. But and the colostrum, like those two are things I'm kind of just always ordering from Surthrival. But you guys have these medicinal mushroom blends and all this stuff. So kind of give us a little bit of a journey into that world, just because why not?
Yeah, I'm just always been interested in like what are the things that are missing that make people stronger. It's like we could break it all down, like your immune system, your endocrine system, like all these kind of things. But like, even if we don't want to like break it all down like that, it's just like what stuff makes you stronger from the environment. There are a lot of wild products in my line, and then there's some that come from agriculture too. The colostrum's an example. Like I use that just about every day. Like I had that twice today because I use it in it's like, I always tell people it's like your new favorite smoothie ingredient. Like that's a food, that's the first milk that comes out of every mammal. The first milking is colostrum. When you consume that stuff, it is like a gut lining regenerator. And it is probably the very best antiviral food you could consume. Like it imparts immunity to you against viruses. It's pretty powerful stuff. It's 3 times more effective against flu than vaccines. So this is a food that I promote really heavily to people who, 1, like to blend drinks, 2, were working on their immune system, or trying to get recovery, athletes who are recovering. It's really good for that. It's just an incredible food. We do the pine pollen extracts because pine pollen has testosterone. This is what a neat thing, Luke, is like back in the day, I created that product thinking, okay, at some point in my life, I'm going to need to be on a testosterone supplement. I was I was still pretty young when I developed that product. Now I'm getting to that place where I'm going to need it more, but I was also seeing so many men going on bioidentical testosterone. Now we're in this place where like gender is not the thing anymore. Like all kinds of people want testosterone. That's been really interesting to me because I did not develop it thinking there were going to be, people across the sort of spectrum who are going to want to use it. But we're at this point now where a lot of people want to put testosterone into their bodies. And so if you're somebody whose testosterone levels have come down or you're somebody who's trying to bring your testosterone levels up, you'd be amazed at what an alcohol extract of pine pollen can do. We do a D3K2 supplement right now that's selling like crazy because it's like wintertime coming. Our elk antler products are outrageous, man. I mean, that's just like this steroidal compound that come from elk. Elk are the largest species or probably the second largest species of deer. They're not bigger than moose, but they're a large species of deer on our landscape, especially out west here. And their antlers, when they're in their growth phase, grow 3 inches a day. And that's a very steroidal compounds in there. So we do all these extracts that I really think about endocrine, immune, recovery, regeneration. And man, they're good products. Like the products that I've been using for 12 years, I really believe in them. And we're about to launch we're working on a CBD line that is outrageous because I've watched this CBD thing for a while, and been like, well, it's like, there's a lot of stuff out there, but we got our hands on some really, really cool products. So those are going to be coming out probably they'll be out in the next couple of weeks. I'm pretty excited. We've been working on it for like about a year. So we got some pretty awesome stuff. So anyway, all stuff that focuses on making people less chihuahua, more wolf.
Nice. That's a great way to summarize it. And I'm glad I got to touch on that because like I said, we never talk about those things. And I think that there's very few companies out there that really have integrity and make stuff that works. And yours does. So I want to just give you props for that.
We got some real heavy, hardcore believers, man. It's like, that's the thing is when you have a really good product, like I don't have to push and promote that hard because people use the products and they come back and they're like, wow, this is really working for me. And a lot of our customers have been with us 12 years. But I do encourage people to just check out the website and like see what we have as offerings because I think you'd be really interested in some of the stuff we have there.
So we got 5 minutes left. Tell us, because by the time I think people can pre-order the TV show now, we're November 20th now. I think this is slated for the beginning of December to come out. So it'll be in a couple weeks here. So in terms of the timeline, normally when I record a show, it might not come out for 3, 4, 5 months sometimes. And so when someone's announcing a new project, it might have already been out or something. But I think we're kind of in a nice time right now. So give us the timeline on, we know the podcast is out every Tuesday, which is when my show comes out. So we're going to be sharing Tuesdays as an exciting day. You had a show out on Tuesdays first, just to be fair. I just picked that day because I was like, Mondays, everyone's too busy. Fridays, everyone wants to fuck off for the weekend. Like Tuesdays, not quite midweek. You got bored at work on Monday. And so Tuesday, you want a little something. But tell us when people can watch the show and then also about the online program that you've got coming up, which I think sounds super cool for someone like me that is just wants to get involved in this way of life, if nothing else, at least as a hobby and doesn't really know where to start,
Yeah, so we're running these two things concurrently. And like I said before, I mean, we just don't have that network backing. We don't have like a big Netflix launch yet. We're not that's not where the show is at. So it was like, how do we put the show out? So here's what we're doing. Starting January 6th, we're delivering 1 episode a week for 8 weeks because there's 8 episodes in season 1. So January 6th, whether you're in the program or whether you just want to see the show, each week, Mondays, you'll get a new episode. So you get all the episodes that way. What we're doing is if you want to see the show on its own, so those shows are 30 minutes long too. They're not 22 minutes. Almost every TV show, if a show's a half an hour, it's actually 22 minutes of content because of the commercial breaks. We've done full 30-minute episodes, 8 of them. So it's quite a bit of content. You'd be surprised at how much longer a 30-minute show feels than a 22-minute Netflix show. You really can feel it. But so right now, pre-sales are open. It's $49. You pay $49, you'll get the whole season one episode at a time starting January 6th. So big thanks to all the people who've gone over to support us, knowing that they're not going to see the shows till January. It means a lot to us. So thank you. We're also running a program. We're calling it the WildFed Season 1 Experience. So what that is each week you'll get an episode of the show, but you'll also be getting a director's cut. What I want to do is take like an hour and a half to break the episode down because there's so much going on that I can't fit into the 30 minutes. Like, how does it work legally, what we're doing? How do you get involved in it? What is the equipment I'm using? How did I get this connection? How do you get your foot in the door? How do you access it? Why are we doing it this way? All that kind of stuff. Also, all the crazy intrigue and stuff that happens in the shows that I don't. There's been some interesting dramas that have happened, with other that doesn't make it into the show. So we'll be breaking all that down. Then there's going to be a structured Q&A with every episode. So each Q&A will be sort of designed to develop out your understanding of how to get involved in some of this lifestyle. Like I said, even if you just want to do one thing a year, or you're like, I want to go full bore. So we'll be doing that. And then of course, there's like a private member group. So that'll run 9 weeks where I'll be one of the moderators in there. So people have access to me, exclusive access for that 9 weeks. So they'll get the shows, they'll get the director's cuts, they'll get the Q&As, and we'll be in there having these discussions as a community. So whether you get the show on its own or you're part of that, we'll be delivering that stuff once a week starting January 6th. I just wanted to let everybody get through the new year and have some time to sell the show in advance. But I'm really excited for people to see it. It's like, it was so cool for me today. You started writing me being like, oh man, these episodes are really cool. And I just haven't shown it to many people. We've kept it kind of a big secret, as I've developed it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned something a few months ago that you were, going in this direction. But honestly, I was kind of thinking like, I don't know, maybe he just kind of like is living his life and
just doing YouTube videos.
Yeah, he got married and just I was like, oh, okay, I guess I don't know what's coming of that. And then when I think that when I saw it, I was like, oh shit, dude, this is
it's not me in a polo shirt that says WildFed with like a vinyl banner behind me that says WildFed doing 8-minute YouTube videos. It's a show. It's if you watch TV shows, it's a TV show just like any other, except it's a little bit longer than the average half-hour show.
Cool, man. Well, I'm really stoked to help you get that out there and turn people onto it because I think it's just, I don't know, it's just good for humankind in general to get closer to nature, man. That's it. I mean, to just boil it down like that. And also the part that I think is intriguing, even though I'm not a big foodie, as I said, is also incorporating the culinary aspect of it too, because I realize I'm kind of an anomaly. Most human beings really enjoy eating tasty food. And even as someone who's not motivated by food per se, just watching like the culinary creations that come at the end of the episode, like I'm like, God, I want to taste that. These are foods that, most modern humans have not ever even tasted. I've never had like acorn flour or any of this stuff that you're working with. And I'm just like,
I always say it's the best food money can't buy.
Right. That's a good tagline. And so I can't go to Erewhon and buy that. It's like, I literally would have to know someone like you or learn from someone like you how to go out and procure those from my environment. And then also to process them and understand how to use the tools with which you do that processing, which is a whole other thing. So it's super cool stuff. I find it just fascinating.
Somebody has to carry the wild food torch in this generation. You know what I mean? Every generation, somebody has to do it or it goes extinct. Our ancestral food gathering technique goes extinct. So I know that if 1,000 people listen to this, there's like 1 or 2 people who's like, ooh, that's me. I want to be part of that. If you're that person, like get on board with us. We say join the subsistence. Like, please get involved. Sign up for a newsletter, get on our social media, whatever it is, and get involved because help us carry this torch forward because this is so important. It's so important that some people are involved in it. And if you just heard this and you're like, well, that's all really interesting. It's like, hey man, keep doing your thing. Because it's like, I'm not saying everybody needs to do this. I just want to grab a hold of the people who are interested and kind of give them a platform, give them a roadmap to get involved.
Brad, in closing, give us the links that we need to find you and your projects.
I write a lot on Instagram at Daniel Vitalis. So that's where you can connect with me. Like if you want to connect with me, don't try to do it through Facebook. I'm not going to be there. Get me on Instagram at Daniel Vitalis. The WildFed is at wild.fed because you know how it is, trying to get your stuff sometimes. The website is wild-fed.com. Again, wild-fed.com. If you go over there, obviously all our social media, but also join the Subsistence. That's our newsletter. Every 2 weeks, we put out really good content. It is not like a jam and sales all the time at you. It's like we're going to put content in there. So if you're into this stuff, that'll be a place to get some exclusive stuff that I don't put out anywhere else. But yeah, please keep hanging on my Instagram. That's where I really love to connect. Oh, wait. And the WildFed podcast. Get the WildFed podcast, obviously.
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course, the WildFed podcast, which is super easy to find, where you find the rest of these great podcasts. Daniel, dude, really great to catch up with you. It's been a while. I'm so pleased for your success and the work you're doing. I think you've really found your stride and your niche here, and it's just so cool to see this unfold. And I'm so happy to share with people. So until we meet again, maybe when we meet again, you'll be coming out here to do some episodes on the SoCal landscape.
With you.
Yeah. Teach me and these city slickers how to go out and live off the land.
I'll go out with you. We'll figure it out together.
All right, brother. I'll see you soon.
Thanks so much, Luke.
Man, if you made it through this conversation, you were a diehard fan. This was a long one, guys, and there was just no way to make it shorter. In fact, when he started going into the pigeons and all that, I wanted to keep going. We might just have to do another one. Daniel's going to be joining me this April, where I'll be speaking and recording at Paleo Effects, of course, out in Austin, Texas. You may have heard the interview I did with the founders, Keith and Michelle Norris, on last week's episode. If you haven't, I recommend going back to that. That's going to give you a lot of context for the whole paleo movement. But anyway, I might just have to sit down with Daniel again out there, because I want to really get into some more of the nuances of the various wildlife that he's eating and studying. I just think it's so fascinating. This whole conversation was just really eye-opening to me, and makes me feel like a total wuss for living in a city and making a butcher kill my animals and not doing it myself. I still feel a little hypocritical about that. So I don't know. It's something I'm going to have to kind of work out myself. Anyway, enough about me. Come join me April 24th through 26th, along with Daniel at Paleo Effects. I'll also be speaking May 2nd and 3rd, 2020. At Meet Delic, a psychedelic symposium in Los Angeles. I'd also like to thank Daniel and his company, Surthrival, man, for really hooking me up with the dopest products for all these years. And, as I said in the end of that conversation there, Daniel is, he's not a pushy marketer kind of guy. I think I probably hold it down in that department, because somebody's got to pay for this goddamn podcast. But, anyway, his company, Surthrival, really is amazing. I mean, they're one of the most integrous, solid supplement companies out there. So I'd love for you to check them out. You can find them at surthrival.com. I've got a discount for you over there. It's 10% off. The discount code is Lifestylist. I can't talk. It's a long conversation. The site is surthrival.com, like survival, but thrive. Surthrival.com. The code is Lifestylist. It's 10%. My two favorite products over there would be the pine pollen extract and also the colostrum. I buy the big old jugs of colostrum. I think it's like 2 kilos, and I just buy like a couple of them at a time. It's not cheap to buy it in bulk, but you save money versus buying the smaller ones. And I just put the colostrum in everything. It's amazing for healing your gut and immunity and all kinds of stuff. It's rad. So check them out, because Daniel's doing great work in the world. And, I'm sure he could use some support over there. All right, then let's thank our official sponsors. Of course, my friends at Juve, Red Light Therapy. I do this red light therapy, guys, almost every day. I have to be honest. If I say something, I do something every day, I'm going to have to mean it. I don't like to exaggerate, but I would say probably 5 out of 7 days, I do at least one Juve session, if not twice. Red light therapy works. It's badass. Helps you produce more ATP, boosts your testosterone. It's really good for collagen production, which means it's great for your skin. It's just rad. There's so much science behind it. It's one of the least woo-woo, sketchy things I do when it comes to biohacking, meaning that there's actual quantifiable data out there to support red light therapy, and I believe Juve are the best ones out there. So go to juve.com/Luke. That's JOOVV. Juve.com/Luke. Enter the code Luke, and you're going to get a free gift. Then let's hop over to my buddy Matt Maruca, who's been on the show a couple times, a hugely popular guest. He's got a company called Raw Optics. That's RAoptics.com. And they make, of course, some super stylish, very effective blue blocking eyewear for day, evening, the dark of the night. protect your eyes, protect your melatonin without looking like a tool, which is awesome. Back in the day, if you wore blue blocking glasses, you look like a complete fool. That's no more with rawoptics.com, where you can enter the code LifeStylist and save 10%. And then let's not forget our medicinal mushrooms and my favorite, I don't even know if there's any others like this, but instant coffee from Four Sigmatic. That's foursigmatic.com/Luke. And the code over there is Luke, I think. If you go to that URL, you'll get a discount. I think it's 15% off. I really love the Four Sigmatic instant coffee for travel. It's mold-free, it's super tasty, and it's infused with medicinal mushrooms. So that is some badass stuff. And oftentimes I'll take that on the road, especially on road trips. And then I'll even go into a Starbucks where they have super swag, moldy, completely pesticide-laden, disgusting coffee. And I'll go in and just get a hot water, which is still probably poorly filtered and fluoridating, calcifying my pineal gland. But anyway, sometimes when you're tired on the road, you got to take one for the team. But I'll go in Starbucks or a swag coffee shop like that and just be like, hey, Jimmy, can I just get a hot water? I've got my own way better coffee in the car, son. And I'll get my hot water and my little shaker, and I'll go make my own dope Four Sigmatic little coffee blend. Sometimes I'll have some of that layered superfood, like coconut creamer. It's pretty good too. So I can make myself kind of a fatty coffee. Bulletproof also makes like a sort of a dry MCT oil butter kind of creamer thing. Few brands are making some pretty good like coconut and butter-based creamers, which are good. Not to throw shade on Four Sigmatic, they actually pay for the ads here, but I'm just giving you my secret recipes. And heads up, Four Sigmatic, if you guys ever hear this, man, get on board with some like powdered creamers. Maybe even like you guys could mix your instant coffee powder with some kind of creamer in one thing. So you have like a fatty, creamy coffee, and then you'll save us from spending our money at those other competitive companies. You know what I'm saying? All right, guys, here's what you got to do. Subscribe to this show. If you don't subscribe to the show, then you don't get notified when there's new episodes. And that would just be a travesty for yourself and, frankly, all of mankind. I know that there's certain podcasts that I love that I absolutely subscribe to because I don't want to have to refresh the feed and like go, oh, I wonder what's on this show or that show. So if you don't want to be a jerk, just click subscribe and my voice will just be popping at you about 6 times a month on average, I think, actually. Now we've got quite a lot of episodes that I'm churning out because I love what I do and I love the feedback from beautiful people like you. So subscribe to the show, share this episode with not just one friend. Let's really stretch it because I think Daniel and I worked hard for this one, this ask. You know, I give you 3 hours. What I'm asking is you give me, it'll probably take you 60 seconds to click the share button, copy the link to this episode, and text it to like 2, 3, 4, 5 friends right now. That would be super helpful. Or alternatively, do absolutely nothing. You don't owe me anything. I'm just so grateful you listened to this episode and that you made it to the end because it was a long one. I hope you were inspired. I hope you learned something. I hope if you're someone who chooses to not eat animal foods that you perhaps got a different perspective and now don't hate people that do, because God knows I love people no matter what fuel they decide to put in their tank. I accept everyone just the way they are. As long as they're cool to me, I'm cool to them. And I'm sure, since you're a Lifestylist podcast listener, that you are as cold as ice, my friend. I'll be back at you on Sunday with a bonus episode, my guest spot on Peak Mind with Michael Trainer. And then we'll be back on Tuesday with Winford, not William. What am I talking about? It's the end of the show. I get tired. Winford Dorr. And we talk about this amazing thing called Zing Performance, which fixes your cerebellum, which we thought was just some dumb kind of useless Frankenstein part of the brain. Turns out your cerebellum is hella important, and dude knows how to fix it. In fact, I'm using his Zing Performance program right now. I'm going to do it when I'm done recording. It's my daily ritual because I just got a brain scan from Dr. Daniel Amen, who's going to be a future show guest. And we discovered that my cerebellum is basically like a piece of moldy butter in the back of my skull. It's not doing me much good. So I'm getting on Winford's trip to get that thing lit up again. And you can learn how to do that next Tuesday. Thank you so much for listening. God bless. And I'll be back in your eardrums Sunday and Tuesday.